in the future. One thing I will say, though, is that we've worked very hard over the years, and particularly recently, to ensure that all of our documentation is available electronically. I know there are some people who like to have hard copies. That's entirely fair enough, but we've worked exceptionally hard to ensure that Conference Extra and the agenda are out much earlier than they used to be. We even got the agenda out, I think, in July this time, which is not something that we necessarily achieved before. Conference Extra came out in good time. So I hope people were able to see what was on the agenda in good time and what we were debating, but we will try and do slightly better with the hard copy material in the future. So thank you for your question. It's certainly something, Jackie, that we're on top of.
Jackie, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, just to thank you for the response on that, Jeff, that I got my papers on the Saturday and, you know, that the amendments, etc., needed to be in by the Monday lunchtime. One other thing, though, is about choice of the courier. Mine came by Hermes, and I found my papers by chance under the doormat that they didn't even put it through the letterbox, and there was no card. Hermes, the person who delivers in Dunbar, is known to be a problem. People are frequently asking, anybody see my Hermes parcel? And just wondering whether or not, for a future conference, if a courier is going to be used, you will be looking at the reliability of courier firms. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know about, Jackie, that particular experience. I know that Hermes have delivered successfully to an awful lot of people. But if people do have any particular issues with anything relating to that, please let us know in the feedback and we'll look into it. But we haven't had experience, I think, of lots of problems across the board, but we'll certainly look into that particular one. So thank you very much for the comment, Jackie. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Now, I have received a motion to suspend standing orders under Standing Order 11.3. It's from Charlie Hasted. And the request is to suspend standing orders in order to take, in the debate on young carers, which is tomorrow, an amendment that's been rejected by the FCC. I'm about to read the statement of the reasons that Charlie has asked for this suspension of standing orders. I will then ask you to vote on whether you want to have a mini debate on this point. If you vote to have a mini debate, I will call Charlie and I will call Jeff for the FCC to speak in that debate, and we will then have a vote, which will require a 2/3 majority to suspend standing orders. So I'm now going to read the statement from Charlie, and I will then ask you to vote whether you want to have a mini debate on this. So the statement from Charlie is, FCC stated that only parts of the original amendment that applied to young carers would be included, then rejected significant parts of the amendment that clearly did apply. This suspension seeks to bring 3 important clauses relating to therapy and respite care back into the amendment to be debated tomorrow. So, the first thing we're going to do is have a vote on whether you want to have a mini debate to hear Charlie and to hear Jeff on whether on suspending standing orders. So could you show your cards if you would like to have a mini debate, please? Okay, and could you show please if you don't want to have a mini debate? That was clearly carried. So first of all, I'm going to ask Charlie Hasted to speak in favour of suspending standing orders. And you have 2 minutes, please.
Morning, everyone. So in my original motion, amendment, I was a little wider than the motion allowed. Hands up. What I'm asking to do is take 3 sub-clauses and pull them into the amendment that is to be debated tomorrow. Specifically, mental health, occupational therapy and other support services being made available to carers in a timely fashion, an unqualified right to respite care equivalent to at least 4 weeks per year as they would have the legal right to expect if they were paid carers, and the right to expect additional respite care to cover things including but not limited to exam periods, medical appointments and so on. These were rejected by FCC, who said they did not apply to young carers. This came as something of a surprise to me because I wasn't aware that young carers didn't sit exams or have medical appointments. To explain why this is so important, young carers miss an average of 48 days of school per year, partially due to a lack of respite care. The Carers UK report that came out yesterday has said that despite it being a legal requirement to offer respite care, many councils are still not doing this. And lack of time for revision, essay writing, taking exams is leading to poorer health and educational outcomes for young carers. It is vitally important that we stand up as a party and say, we respect that young carers are giving their lives, their mental, their physical and their emotional well-being to care for people they love, and we need to support them and defend them and make sure that they have the right to be young people. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Jeff, would you like to come and speak, please?
Thank you, Simon. Well, conference, there's a bit of background to this. And the first point to make is that Charlie did submit a motion on carers much wider than the young carers motion that we've taken at 9 tomorrow morning. And that was rejected by the FCC for a number of reasons, including things relating to the drafting and so on. We had a huge number of motions in, and we just had to make choices as to which we took. And a lot of that much wider motion on carers came back in the wider amendment that Charlie's talked about in relation to young carers. And so we rejected the amendment. This is a short debate tomorrow morning on young carers from 9 to 9:45. We wanted the focus to be on the experiences, particularly of young people and those who are involved in providing care who are young. Those were the voices that we wanted to hear in this debate, and we felt that Charlie's amendment broadened it out considerably so that it would become a much wider debate on carers generally as opposed to young carers. Now, Charlie's made a lot of, I think, really good points, and a lot of those points will be really good speeches in the debate. But the amendment itself was much wider than the motion. And as I say, we wanted to keep the motion focused on young carers. Now, when Charlie appealed against the rejection of the amendment, we did look at the appeal and we actually upheld part of it. In the agenda at page 29, you'll see the motion. And at lines 29 to 30, we have actually added a drafting change to reflect one of Charlie's points. All of the issues they raise are really, really important, but they can't be shoehorned easily into a 45-minute debate about young carers. As I say, in a debate about young carers, we wanted to keep the focus very tightly on that. FCC has a difficult job in trying to keep debates on track and trying to ensure they stay on topic, and the decisions we make about amendments are designed to do that. So I do hope that you will not suspend standing orders and allow this debate to be what it should be, which is about young carers. And I've no doubt that many of the points that Charlie makes really forcefully and can be made really well in the debate tomorrow morning on what we've got. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Right, we're now going to move to a vote. Can I see all of those who are in favour of suspending standing orders to allow this amendment to be taken? Thank you. And can I see all those against? I think that had a simple majority, but not a two-thirds majority, so that is lost. Thank you. So we're now going to move to whether we accept or reject the FCC report. Could I see, first of all those in favour of accepting the FCC report? Thank you. And now could I see all those in favour of rejecting the FCC report? Thank you. That's clearly carried. I'm now going to ask Jeremy Hargreaves to present the FPC report.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Simon. I'm Jeremy Hargreaves. I'm one of the vice chairs of the Federal Policy Committee, along with Duncan Brack and Sarah Ludford. As I'm sure you all know, the Constitution now says that the party leader is the chair of the Federal Policy Committee. So we, of course, lost our chair back in July, and on behalf of FBC, I'd like to thank Vince for his support for our work in his time as leader. And, of course, we had a new chair. Yes, I think it was appropriate to applaud Vince. And I'd like to, of course, this week we had our first session with our new chair, a very constructive session, and we look forward very much to working with Joe. If there's one theme in the work of the Federal Policy Committee at the moment, I think it's this. A desire to, as well of course as to develop policy which is good quality to bring here, it's to work with others in the party, notably the campaigns and communications part of the party, to develop policy which isn't just right, but which is actually useful politically for us and will go out and do some political work for us which we can campaign on and will actually win us votes. So I'm very proud that on that basis, we've got 4 policy papers coming to you over the next couple of days, which I think really do that very effectively. This afternoon, we will be debating a paper called A Fairer Share for All, which does a great job of showing where Liberal Democrats would support the least well-off, and is a significant, big package for helping people who are not well-off. And I think it's a very important, not least looking at the number of traditional Labour voters who are now considering us again for the first time in a few years. Tomorrow morning we'll be talking about health and social care and the many, many issues facing that whole system, not least in terms of public profile, those relating to Brexit and the enormous threats which Brexit, among all its many other problems, poses to the health and social care system, from availability of medicines to availability of workforce and a whole load of others. We will be debating also this conference a paper on crime and policing, tackling a number of detailed issues in the police system, but also very high-profile issues of knife crime. And finally, we will be talking about climate change, which is, of course, as well as a long-standing Liberal Democrat theme, also particularly high profile this year. So I'm very proud that we're doing that. Over the next couple of years, our programme, we will be intend to bring to Spring Conference a paper on what we've called the nature of public debate, which means fake news, then the future of journalism, issues around that. We are just starting work on policy papers on utilities, on natural environment, and on the future of work, a whole range of difficult issues there. FPC has agreed to start some work we haven't started yet, but we hope to bring to conference next year, a paper looking absolutely at the fundamentals of liberalism. Many of you will be familiar with the paper It's About Freedom, which was approved by the party about 15 years ago and is a great statement of liberal principles and how they affect the world. The world has changed a lot since 2002, so many of those won't have changed, but how they apply is, I think, something we think could really do with a good look, as liberal principles that we thought were very accepted are increasingly under challenge. So we will bring a paper on that next autumn, hopefully. You may have read that there is a possibility there might be a general election over the next few weeks and months. Across the party, many preparations are happening for that at all levels. You will be, I hope, pleased to hear that for the manifesto that we will, of course, need for a general election, work is extremely well advanced. Some further work will, of course, be needed at the actual moment of finally signing it off, when we know what the political context is immediately at that point. But a lot of work has gone in over many months into that, and that is very well advanced for producing a manifesto for the general election. We are very keen, as a last point I'll make, we're very keen as FPC, as well as doing our own work, to do anything we can to support policy discussion across the party more widely, whether that's in local parties or regional parties or SAOs or small groups of 3 people wanting to talk about policy, whatever it is. So we're always on the lookout for ways of things we can do more to support that. And if you have any ideas, please do let us know. That's a genuine request. We think we do quite a lot. Working groups, which produce the papers that I've been talking about, do a huge amount of consultation. They run a consultation session at conference. They often do session at regional conferences. They often produce packs for discussion by local parties or others. We often do a range of online discussions, from webinars to questionnaires to all sorts of things, so that we do a lot of consultation on the proposals before they get to conference. And by the way, I really would encourage you all to engage in those. By the time something gets to this platform, it's pretty well set in stone, it's pretty well set out in the paper, and changing it, though of course possible through amendments, is more difficult. Please do engage at earlier stages in working groups. We have also produced a range of short policy guides, which have just been updated over the last few weeks, and you can buy on the Lib Dem image stand. Some of those cover individual policy areas, environment or education or whatever, and some of them, or one of them, covers liberal principles and a sort of overall position of the party. So you may find those useful both for yourselves and for others, including new members who want to know more about what we stand for. I think that's enough from me.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Could you answer the question from Suzanne, please?
Yes. Is Suzanne here? Hi, Suzanne. So the question is, I guess you've all seen it, is could the policy committee, as well as having liaisons for SAOs and regions, also have some for liaising with AOs, associated organisations, or at least informing them of any recent relevant policy development work? Thank you, Suzanne. It's a very good point, actually. We had a discussion about it at the FPC meeting on Wednesday. We will set up a process, a system for liaising with AOs as well as SAOs. And indeed, we're keen also to talk to other party bodies which may not be AOs, maybe informal groupings or whatever. So we will set up a system for doing specifically what you've asked, Suzanne. But I think also we talked about a sort of an important underlying point there, which is about providing information which on what we do as a committee and what we're planning to do in the future so people can involve themselves in it. We do produce a report on each meeting of FPC. We meet about monthly and we write a report which normally goes on our Facebook page and on the Liberal Democrat Voice. But we also think it would be useful if we made that available to SAOs and AOs specifically, and also to others. So we're, over the next few weeks, going to start making it possible to people to receive that report by email. If you would like to receive that report, whether you're an AO or just an individual, please do contact the policy unit and let us know that you would like to receive that, and we will start making that available by email as well. So I hope that addresses some of the points in your question, Suzanne.
Thank you. Suzanne, do you have a supplementary question?
Okay.
Thank you, Jeremy. So we're now going to vote on whether we accept or reject the report from the FPC. Can I see all those in favour of accepting the FPC report, please? Thank you. And all those in favour of rejecting it? Fine. Thank you. The report is clearly accepted. That's the end of this part of the conference. We're now going to move on to a motion on gender equality, and I will hand over as chair to Cara Jenkinson.
Good morning, conference. We now move to agenda item F4, which is continuing the fight for gender equality. And there's a drafting amendment for this motion, which you can see in your conference extra. We do still have some speaking slots, so I would encourage you to put a speaking card in, particularly first-time speakers. And I would now like to ask Councillor Emma Sandry to stand by, and I call on Christine Jardine MP to move the motion. Thank you.
Good morning, conference. Hope you're all wide awake. I'm not. Anyway. I just love being a woman, even if occasionally I might like to be a different woman. Maybe a great actress who can kick ass like Emma Thompson, or someone with stage presence and sounds fantastic like Adele. And believe me, if any of you out there have ever heard me sing, you'll know why I'd rather sound like Adele. But you won't generally hear me complain about being a woman, except for one thing. This gender costs. It costs financially, physically, and emotionally. Just getting through the day can be more expensive for a woman than it is for a man, whatever your age. We have to pay up to 37% more for goods which are targeted at us. Scientists tell me our skin and our hair is exactly the same, but the goods cost more. Everything from basic toiletries to clothes and even haircuts. Check it out the next time you go to the hairdressers. It's almost twice the price if you're a woman. But there's worse. 40% of young girls in this country say that instead of sanitary products, they've used toilet paper. Yes, toilet paper. Because towels and tampons are too expensive. Not least because they are taxed as non-essential. I mean, really? Non-essential? I would just love to have a wee chat with whoever came up with that one. And we still, over the course of our careers, get paid less than men. The gender pay gap, something we would probably still be trying to prove existed if Joe Swinson hadn't fought for gender pay gap reporting for large companies. We now know it exists and we now know the situation. In 2019, almost 50 years since the Equal Pay Act, the median pay gap between men and women is 11, almost 12%. And there you have a double whammy. Women pay more and get paid less. For some of us, like me, that's not acceptable, but we can cope. For most of my life, that financial inequality hasn't held me back. But just stop for a minute and think about what it might mean to a family on low income. When I was younger, there was myself, my two sisters, and my mum. We were an all-woman household, 4 of us. Now multiply the difference in the cost of female products by 4, and you begin to see what a difference that could make to a household budget. But that's just a financial cost. Too many women in our society still pay a huge physical and emotional price for their gender. Sexual assaults, domestic violence, workplace harassment, all of it unacceptable and none of it adequately dealt with. And even the very worst cases. According to the Istanbul Convention, this country only has 1/3 of the rape crisis centres we should have. Now, all of those things, individually and together, take a toll. And for women who are already suffering discrimination because they come from a BAME or an LGBT plus background or are part of another disadvantaged group, our society continues to heap more misery on top of the suffering they already face. Now, the motion in front of you today may not mention them specifically, but there is one other group. The more than 3 million women in this country who are currently suffering from the mismanagement of changes in the state pension. They're not in this motion because that's part of my former brief at DWP. But it's ironic, isn't it? You change the state pension age to make men and women equal, and yet it's still the women who are left paying the price. But all of that, all of it, can be changed by changing one other thing, and I'll give you a clue. I've already mentioned the work that Joe has done over the years, but since 2017, Leila Moran has introduced a bill on period poverty. I introduced my Pink Tax Private Members Bill to tackle gender-based pricing. And none of us will ever forget that it was Vera who led the parliamentary campaign to have upskirting outlawed. You'll notice something about that. We're all women, and we're all new. So we can make changes, but to do it, we need more women in Parliament. It's not enough. It's not enough that we celebrated the centenary of women's suffrage last year. Yes, we had to do it, but it's not enough. We need to work this year, next year, and every year to make sure that we finish the job that they started. Now, I've been overwhelmed at the support across the country for our attempts to tackle the everyday prejudice and discrimination which women and girls across the UK face. While this Conservative government has done woefully little to address the inequality, the Liberal Democrats have brought forward those progressive pieces of legislation on upskirting and the pink tax. Our daughters and our sons both deserve equal support on all social and economic areas. And by bringing this motion to conference, we are making it clear that we will be bold and ambitious. and outlaw gender inequality. This motion is a key step towards addressing the huge injustices that persist for women and girls across the UK, from that gender pay gap to the price gap to period poverty. It's been a long journey so far, but we still have a way to go. But you know that old saying about every journey beginning with one step? Well, this motion is it. So, conference, let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. I'd like now to call Jacqueline Bell to stand by, and I'll call Emma Sandry, who is a councillor, county councillor in Cardiff and first-time speaker, to the podium. Thank you.
Morning, conference, and thank you. I want to speak in support of this motion, but in particular I want to touch on lines 42 and 72 and the amendment calling for more female councillors. We not only need more women in Parliament, we also need more women in local government. I'm one of only 2 female Lib Dem councillors in Cardiff, and our group is made up of 11 people. Then the other woman was recently selected as a PPC. So if we have a snap election and she's successful, I could end up being the only woman in our council group, which is a prospect that I'm actually deeply uninterested in. Too often diversity and equality are treated as nice to haves, or as if it's the job of minorities to fix representation issues. But here's the rub. Women are not a minority. We're at least half the population. We deserve to be heard at all levels and in every room. I hope the call to implement Section 106 of the Equality Act 2010 is applicable to all candidates at every level and not just Westminster elections. We can't allow gender gaps to go unnoticed because they're at a less high-profile level. I want to finish by saying that we also need to demand better of ourselves when seeking to achieve gender equality. We can't address gender equality issues in wider society if we don't start with ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. I'd now like to ask Emma Walker to stand by, and I now call Jacqueline Bell.
Conference. For men, shaving is a choice. For women, menstruation, menopause, and frequently incontinence post-childbirth are obligatory. Women vary in how menstruation affects them. At best, a few days easily managed. For others, intense pain, the embarrassment of flooding in public, time off school or work due to being indisposed. Not something you'd choose. Aside from biology, there's another whammy, the cost of sanitary products. It's suggested that the average UK woman spends £18,000 in her lifetime. The markup's vast, selling to a captive audience. The heavier your period, the higher the cost. Know that. Been there, got the t-shirt. There's been a long campaign to exempt hygiene products from VAT. It was 25%. Luxury rated. A luxury? Come on. It's still 5%, and something essential for health, personal hygiene and comfort. They should be VAT-free. Whatever the VAT argument, the fact is that for many women and girls, the cost is unaffordable. For families on benefits with non-earning daughters, the cost is a strain. As a social worker, I was aware of girls being kept off school, women being sanctioned from universal credit for missing appointments because they could not leave home. Toilet tissue is no substitute for proper protection. Period poverty is real. 1 in 10 girls in the UK, 1 in 5 in Scotland cannot afford protection, a basic health need. There are sources of help. Some food banks provide, but there's the embarrassment of asking. In Scotland, secondary schools and other places keep supplies thanks to the Scottish Government, and I don't often thank the Scottish Government. In East Lothian, Hey Girls is a social enterprise set up in her village home by resident Celia Hodgson. It's now moved to premises in Musselburgh. and they employ mums in school working hours to produce biodegradable products. For every pack bought, that the company gives a pack free for a needy person. They've now linked with East Lothian Council, will pay a reduced price to provide free hygiene products in schools, community centres and surgeries, along with educational materials as starter packs for primary schools. This kind of help is useful, but it needs duplication. Otherwise, we have a postcode lottery of support for what is a basic bodily function that too many women and girls cannot afford to deal with. Please support the motion. Let's help work to end period poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'd like to ask Sarah Brown to stand by, and I now call Emma Walker, who is mental health spokesperson for the Scottish Lib Dems.
Deeds, not words. Since 1903, Emmeline Pankhurst's motto has inspired generations of women. But almost 120 years on, it's more important than ever to emphasise the need for deeds and words in the fight for gender equality. I don't want you to look at me for a second. I'd like you to look around the room. Don't have to stand up, just turn around, look up to the galleries, look behind you, look next to you. Now, I'm a first-time speaker at Federal Conference, but I've spoken at Scottish Conference several times. This is my third time in 17 months speaking on women's issues. And what do you know? Each time I have, they've been scheduled in the first slot of the entire conference, when people are still making their way here, when the room is never full. This is particularly noticeable today when what we are discussing here is the continued silencing of the female experience. We need to do better. If we want more women elected, we need more women to speak, but crucially, we need more women to be heard. Now, I'd like to share a personal experience with you today. I'd like to, but I can't. It happened to me. It was the worst experience of my life, and I want to share it with you so that other women can take heed. But I can't tell you because I have an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, which I was forced to sign at a time when I was emotionally and financially vulnerable. Terrible things are happening to women in the workplace across the UK every single day, be it sexual harassment or maternity discrimination. Women are gagged if they do fight, and we are gagged if we don't. If a woman decides not to take action, and most don't, she's not allowed to tell the world what has been done to her, because it would be slander. Yet if she takes her employer to court and wins, she is made to sign an NDA, which cancels out any real notion of winning. Women are storytellers, and our stories are most powerful when we can reach out our hand and say to our sisters, "Come on, girl, this is how you get back up." I run a project doing just that called Mother's Work, and at one time I was working with 12 women in Edinburgh who all worked for the same bank and were being bullied out of their job because of sexual or pregnancy-based discrimination. Not one of them knew about the experiences of the other 11. I'm one of a group of women who are seeking to break our NDAs, not so that we can shame the people who wronged us, but rather because we want to be able to empower other women to push back, stand up, and fight for equality. Deeds and words. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and the point well made about the scheduling of this motion. We should listen as FCC. And I'd like now to ask Jenny Sawford to stand by, and I now call Sarah Brown to speak.
Conference. I'm delighted that we're debating gender equality because, despite everything, not all genders are created equal. I want to talk to you guys about my experiences as a survivor of domestic abuse. I escaped such a relationship recently, and Conference, it was hard. I spoke to a number of agencies, the police, Women's Aid, and a number of charities that supported women. I felt that the support from the police in particular was almost non-existent. I went to give a statement and I was interviewed by 2 male police officers when, quite frankly, a man was the last person I wanted to see. One charity helped me, the Broxtowe Women's Project. I phoned them in desperation after speaking to the police. The woman who I spoke to was helpful and supportive. She believed me, she listened to me, which was more than I felt I received from the police. She put me in touch with a solicitor who helped me through the process of separating myself from that person. And a small little plug, next weekend I'm doing a triathlon to raise money for the Broxtowe Women's Project, so please do feel free to sponsor me. To anyone who's going through it, although it feels like it, there is an end to it, and you will get through it. And if what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, then I'm entering the world's strongest woman. One quick point that I wanted to add on to the end of my speech is about menstruators. Not all those that menstruate are female. Trans men also menstruate, and we need to bear that in mind as well. Yeah. So I'll leave it there, but one final point. Trans women are women, trans men are men. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. I'd like to ask Helen Tamblin-Saville to stand by. I'll now call Jenny Sawford, and she is a first-time speaker.
Hello, conference. You've done my first bit for me, so thank you very much. I had no intention of speaking at conference at all. I had a discussion with my friend this morning, saying I'm definitely not doing that. But I sat here listening to Christine's speech, and I decided I needed to say something. I'm a primary school teacher, and I've been teaching for 3 years now. And her speech on period poverty really hit my heart. I was very lucky at school. I had a very supportive family. I could tell them when I needed to have sanitary products, and they would make sure that I was sorted. I know as a teacher that lots of children, lots of young girls who are still in year 5 or year 6 of primary, who start their period, don't have that support at home. They don't have somebody that they can talk to and ask them to do a simple thing like go to the shops and buy sanitary products. They might not have their mum at home anymore. They might not have a mum that they feel they can talk to. So as teachers, we try to provide that for them. We try through all our lessons and through talks with children individually or in a SHE lessons that they can come and tell us if they need sanitary products and if they have any other questions. But imagine how much easier it would be for them if they didn't need to worry about what am I going to do? What am I going to do when I get to school if it happens? They would know that we would be supported by our government to have everything they need any day that they needed it. We do that in our school. We already provide that because we know how important it is. But that comes from our budgets. It shouldn't. It should be provided by our government. And that's what I wanted to say. So thank you, conference.
Thank you, Jenny. I'd like to now ask Louisa Porritt to stand by and call on Helen Tamblin-Saville to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, conference. I'm a first-time speaker at Federal Conference. Thank you. But a motion on gender equality is far too important for me not to speak. I support this motion, but I would like to draw particular attention to lines 19 and 20, which state that 32% of MPs are women. I think we'll all agree that this is simply not good enough. Earlier this year, the Four Set Society published a report in February. It stated that there are gaps in equality law and that MPs and peers are exempt from Part 5 of the 2010 Equality Act, which includes provision of sexual harassment in the workplace that applies to employees. Volunteers are unprotected, staff harassed by a third party are not covered at all. Alarmingly, sexual harassment isn't just a problem in Westminster, it happens at a local level. It happens at a grassroots level, and party systems are often not equipped to deal with it. Harassment is a barrier that must not be ignored, and it is a massive deterrent for women getting involved in politics. And I have experienced it myself. As Liberal Democrats, we demand better, and yet we must do more ourselves to address this problem of harassment, which is a huge barrier for women getting involved in politics. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like now to call Louisa Porritt, MEP, who will be summating on the motion.
Conference. Liberal Democrats stand above all for fairness. We're still living in a country where if you're a woman, many facets of life are unfair. Why is it still the case that you are taxed just for having a period? Let me tell you, having periods is a tax on gender in and of itself. With so many people struggling to make ends meet in this country, some parents will be forced to choose between giving dignity to their daughters and putting food on the table. Let's not allow that to be a choice that people have to make. We have the opportunity today to play a leading role in the fight to end period poverty, not just as a UK political party, but as a country. Conference, if we pass this motion today, then I am committed to seeking to bring about this long overdue change across the EU. The tampon tax must be scrapped. And we must make it easy for women and young girls to access the basic products that they need by making them freely available in public places. We heard from Jacqueline Bell how some food banks give them out, but this is not well known and should be the responsibility of government to provide. And Sarah Brown, making those products freely available should mean that everyone who needs them can access them. I suspect this heartless, Brexit-obsessed Tory government won't bring about these much-needed changes. But that is precisely why we must make these reforms part of our manifesto to form the next government, so that when we do that, we can get to work right away on ending gender-based injustices. Why must we pay more for our clothes than men do? We already pay more anyway because we're expected to vary our wardrobes, while Mark Zuckerberg can wear the same grey t-shirt every day and be CEO of Facebook. You heard from Christine. In 2019, we are still being paid less because of our gender, with women paid on average almost 12% less than men for doing the same work. That is absurd. It is an absolute disgrace that we still only have a fraction of the rape crisis centres in this country that we are legally entitled to. We must change this and set a new precedent, not just for the UK, but the whole of the EU, because I believe in leading, not leaving. And on that note, Councillor Emma Sandry is right. We do need more women at all levels of government, because when we aren't in positions of power, we cannot make legislation that reflects society as a whole. We cannot abide a situation whereby 50% of our population are often still not part of the conversation, whether that's in government, business, or any other sector. Conference, this is an all-encompassing motion covering issues that women and young girls face, from period poverty to shared parental leave. I'm urging you to just think of equality as a whole today. We can set an example and show that we are entitled to be the next government by bringing equality to the forefront. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louisa. We now move to the vote on the motion. Can I ask when voting to make sure that the side with voting on it is facing towards me? So if all those in favour of the motion could raise their hands. And all those against. And that motion is clearly carried. I'd like to say thank you to my aide Nick DaCosta and my hall aide Chris Mains, and thank you to all of the speakers for an excellent debate on this important motion. And also just to draw your attention to the ballot for emergency motions, so if you could submit your choice to the ballot box at the front by the speaker's table, and if you can do that by 12:50 today. Thank you. We will have a short pause before the next agenda item.
So when we come to, major
Good morning, Conference. We now move to items F5 and F6, the reports of the Campaign for Gender Balance and the Federal Appeals Panel. We will start in numerical order with the Campaign for Gender Balance report, and I therefore call Julia Cambridge to present the report.
Good morning, Conference. Before I start, I just want to pay tribute to the speakers. I've noticed some people were very passionate in that debate. It was a fantastic motion, and thank you very much for bringing that. So good morning. I'm delivering this report on behalf of Helena Cole and our chair, Candy Piercy. Now, the Campaign for Gender Balance has been extremely busy since last spring conference 6 months ago. Even whilst the local elections were underway, we were providing mentoring support for women awaiting approval and parliamentary selections. I've led, as Vice Chair, our candidate approval team to considerable success, helping a significant number of women get approved. And I want to pay tribute to the team that have helped me achieve that. And then, with only a few weeks' warning, the Euro selections were in full swing. I took on a role of guiding women through sitting the Euro conversion exams. Helena Cole, our other Vice Chair, was a tower of strength, working alongside Candy to support women in parliamentary selections at the same time as the Euro selections. It was fantastic to see women candidates, many of whom had been trained and encouraged by CGB, winning top places in the Euro selections. And this was in spite of the proposed diversity zipping mechanism being dropped. It was wonderful to see those women who had won their selections without the application of any mechanism, taking up their places in the European Parliament. And the Lib Dem group in the European Parliament composed of 9 women and 7 men. That group is led, of course, by Catherine Bearder, with Louisa Porritt, who was here a minute ago, as the deputy leader. So, on the Westminster front, we've had even more good news. Women have been winning selections in iconic seats like Southwark and Old Bermondsey, where Humaria Ali was selected in an open selection with a massive vote of confidence from local members. The Future Women MP weekends have continued to pay dividends, and with our graduates standing for selection for Parliament in the UK, and others, of course, now elected in the European Parliament. Before our recent and very welcome new MPs joined the Liberal Democrats, all of our women MPs were Future Women MP graduates. And since, of course, the spring report, we have an inspiring woman leader in Jo Swinson. In July, we held another successful Future Women MP weekend. We've continued to reserve at least 20% of places for BAME delegates. As ever, we had a high level of applications. 54 women applied for 24 places. We'd like to thank all of our amazing trainers for that weekend and Layla Moran, who joined us for one of the days. So we intend to begin a new fundraising project at this conference to allow us to run more training in general and a second Future Women MP weekend in particular. We'd like to congratulate Sarah Young, Anood and Arfan from the newly established Racial Diversity Campaign. We've supported them as they've delivered mentoring to BAME candidates and will be continuing to support them with their training at this conference. The Campaign for Gender Balance has been on full general election planning mode. We've been involved in helping fast-track women for parliamentary approvals and also providing mentors and support for seat selections throughout the UK. Exciting times are ahead. And finally, this report would not be complete without paying tribute for the support and leadership that's been shown by Natalie Chindipa at Lib Dem HQ. We're so lucky to have her as a member of staff supporting CGB. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. The Federal Conference Committee has not taken any questions to this report. I would like to draw attention, though, to the fact that there is a question to the Federal Board report tomorrow on the statistics around gender balance within what we're doing as a party. So those of you with a particular interest in this topic may wish to attend that report and listen to that question. We will now move to a vote on whether to accept or reject the report of the Campaign for Gender Balance. Can I see all those in favour of accepting the report, please? And all those against, please. That is clearly carried in MCON. Thank you very much. On to item F6, the report of the Federal Appeals Panel. Could I ask Alan Masters to give the report, please?
Good morning, Conference. I always think that when I've come over the few years to make this report, that I needed to explain again how the Federal Appeals Panel works and its role. So forgive me if some of you may have heard this over the years, but I just wanted to make some important points. The Federal Appeals Panel is, I think, probably unique to our party. Our party, in the wisdom of the people that made the various constitutions, created various disputes resolution procedures within it, and there are a number. Each state party has an appeal panel. Candidate selection committees have appeal panels, and the Federal Appeals Panel, if you like, is the supreme court of those things. So there's a mechanism by which, once everybody has exhausted other remedies, it comes to us. That's a fantastic liberal idea, because there are mechanisms within the party for people to challenge decisions made in relation to their rights within the party, and safeguards are there. And the importance of the way that it's set up, which I'm going to say again, is that there are three key points. There's independence. I, as the chair of the panel, and the 12 panel members that are with me, are independent of the parliamentary party. They're independent of the federal executive, and they're independent of the executive itself. The role is one that guarantees that independence back to you. There's transparency, because whatever decisions we make in the year are on the report that you would have had, setting out precisely what it is. This report comes to you, not to anybody else. It's a report you vote on and decide, and therefore you, at the end of the day, are the ultimate masters of the role that we play. If you don't like what we've done, then this report you will reject. If you are happy with the decisions that have been made over the year, you will accept it. I'm glad to say that I was re-elected for a second 5-year term in 2016, and I've been coming to conference for a number of years, and I've never had a rejection of anything we've done so far, so I must be doing something right. I just wanted to say something, however, because although I've been banging on about this for a number of years, it is important to actually, if I may, thank those members of the panel, not just myself, who over the years actually spend a lot of time adjudicating on disputes and carefully looking at them and coming to decisions. It's a difficult task sometimes. There are issues that come before us that are controversial, and we have to make decisions that don't always agree, but not everybody will agree with. But it's done, as I said, with independence, transparency, and accountability to you. Just to say a little bit about me, I'm a human rights barrister. I've been a Liberal Democrat, young Liberal, since about the age of 15. There's no other party I would rather be to. This role that I perform for the party is one that gives me great pleasure because it's such a Liberal party, a Liberal role, to be able to do this to the party. But I wanted to say something before, because I've noticed recently that people have misunderstood the role of the Federal Appeals Panel, and that some of the complaints that we're getting are really merely asking us to reverse the decision of another panel, of the English Appeal Panel, the Welsh Appeals Panel, or somewhere else. I've had a recent appeal where we just got the papers saying, will you make a different decision? But the role of the Federal Appeals Panel is not for us to reverse the decision that somebody doesn't like. The role of us is to review as to whether or not what has been done is fair and is in accordance with the Constitution and doesn't infringe the rights of the member. And so I say this because I think it's quite useful. When if somebody is thinking of coming to the panel, having exhausted remedies elsewhere, please look at our published procedures as to how we operate and the articles in the Constitution upon which we operate. And you'll see that our role is more of a judicial review of decisions that have been made, not another trial of those situations. It's really important that when people come to us, they specify precisely what right they consider has been infringed by whoever else has made a decision before us. I say that hopefully because I've been banging on about the safeguards that we give in the past, and I think perhaps the message should be that we do have enormous power with the things that we can do to safeguard the individual's rights, but we have to do that within the constrained situation of reviewing what has been done rather than imposing our own decisions upon it. So having said that, I hope you don't mind a 2 or 3 minutes lecture on these things. What I'd like to ask people is to vote in favour of the report that I presented to you today to prove again that we are generally accountable to you and that you are the ultimate masters of the Federal Appeals Panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Federal Conference Committee have received no questions to this report, so we will move straight to the vote. Can I see all those in favour of accepting this report, please? And all those against, please. That is clearly carried NEMCON. Thank you. Before I hand over to the next chair, can I just draw people's attention to 2 things? Firstly, the emergency motions ballot, which can be found on the back of today's conference daily, which needs to be handed in by 10 to 1 at the ballot box over on the speaker's table to your left, my right. And secondly, can I say that we have had reports of an issue with the electronic speakers cards. So if you have submitted an electronic speakers card and are not sure if it's been received, please do fill in a paper copy. Thank you. I've been Alistair McGregor, your chair for this session. I'd like to thank my aide Liz Lynn and my aide in the hall, Simon McGrath. And I will now hand over to Sally Burnell to chair the next session. Thank you.
morning, conference. My name's Sally Bonnell. I'll be chairing this session. My aides are Jeff Payne on the stage here and Simon McGrath in the hall. Before we start, as Alistair just mentioned, a ballot is still open to select the topics for the 2 emergency debate slots on Monday and Tuesday. The ballot box is down here, and it will be open until 12:50 today. Alistair also mentioned, for those of you who've just arrived, we have had a problem with the electronic speakers cards. So if you're unsure, please make sure you put in a hard copy down at the speakers table. So we're now moving to item F7, Business Tax Reform, Fair for Business and Fair for Society. The motion starts at page 13 of your agenda. On page 4 of Conference Daily, you'll see that Federal Conference Committee has agreed to make 1 drafting amendment, and we will have 3 amendments to be moved, which are in Conference Daily on pages 4 and 5. The mover of the motion will have 7 minutes to speak, the summator of the motion, and the movers and summators of the amendments shall each have 4 minutes, and then all of the speakers will have 3 minutes. If you do intend to vote in this debate, I would please, if you could make sure that you're sitting on this side of those brown railings, just so that we can see you and we can count you. And for the benefit of speakers, we've got a couple of standby speaker seats right at the front of the hall down to my left. And I'd be grateful if you could use them so I can make sure that you're here and we can keep the debate flowing. So would the mover of Amendment 1, Nessa McAlane, please stand by? And I call Martin Wheatcroft to move the motion.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for an important debate. Before we get started, I just want to say that this motion is about the taxation of business activities. It is not about VAT, it is not about income tax, it is not about the many other taxes that need reform, which I hope we can deal with in future conferences. Importantly, it is not about business rates, a flawed tax that desperately needs replacing, and which we voted to abolish at last year's conference. This morning's motion is about replacing corporation tax with something better. Conference, it will not be news to you that our tax system for business is broken. It is too complicated. It changes frequently. It is perverse and irrational. It does not provide a level playing field. It is an administrative nightmare. And it is difficult to understand, even for the tax authorities. It is not fit for purpose, and it needs to be fixed. We need to fix it not just so that society gets the money that is needed to pay for decent public services. We need to fix it so that we have a tax system that encourages enterprise and supports responsible businesses that pay good wages, that provide the goods and services that we need, and that invest in our society. Ultimately, we can't do this alone. We need to work with other major economies around the world to build a new international tax system for business, based on the clear principles set out in this motion. I won't go through all of them in the interest of time, but you'll be delighted to know that there is a detailed working group paper available on the conference website if you are interested in finding out more. But just to pick up a few of them. Firstly, we believe that businesses should pay tax. You may be surprised that we even needed to say that, but not everyone shares this view. Most businesses are responsible businesses that want to contribute to the societies in which they operate. They know the importance of the physical, economic, legal, and social infrastructure that enables them to do business, and they want to pay their fair share. But what businesses do really want, with good reason, is a level playing field. There needs to be equitable treatment between businesses and types of business activity, between small and large businesses, between domestic and global corporations. We also believe that businesses operating in the UK should pay tax in the UK, and, just as importantly, that businesses operating in other countries should pay a fair rate of tax there too, especially in the developing world. Importantly, businesses should not be able to use structural flaws in the tax system to reduce their effective tax rate to zero. If you make a profit, you should pay the tax. Now, we know that it might take a little time to persuade other countries to make changes to the way that the business tax system works around the globe, especially if we were to do something as unforgivably stupid as to give up our position of influence in Europe. Thank you. But that doesn't mean we need to wait. International action is needed to address some issues, but many of our problems with corporation tax are homegrown. We can and should replace it with a better system, based on the principles in this motion. Stable, simpler, better, fairer. Turning to the amendments. We welcome Amendment 1 on building tax capacity in developing countries. It is a very sensible addition to the motion, and we fully support it. We also support Amendment 3 on free ports. Although it is a little off topic, as free ports are more about customs duties and VAT than the taxation of business profits, we agree that free ports are a solution to a problem that doesn't need fixing. We do not support Amendment 2. It wants to replace our straightforward call for a reversal of Tory tax cuts with a nebulous suggestion of alignment with European tax rates. This could mean anything. There is a very wide range of different tax rates across Europe and different deductions that mean that the headline rate is not always the tax rate that businesses actually pay. It also suggests continually reviewing the tax rate, which conflicts with our proposal for a long-term stable tax rate. After all, one of the big problems with the current system that we are trying to fix is that it changes so frequently, to the detriment of both business and public services. We think the government should determine a rate that is fair to business and fair to society, and then do something really radical, not change it. A stable tax system and a stable tax rate will do far more to improve the chances of success for UK PLC than continual changes of ever-increasing complexity. In summary, this motion calls for much-needed reform, a reform that fixes the flaws in our system of business taxation, a reform that will enable businesses to operate in the UK with confidence and to plan ahead, a reform that encourages and incentivises productive investment, a reform that ensures a level playing field, a reform that supports responsible businesses that want to do the right thing, businesses that pay decent wages to their employees, businesses that contribute to society and our prosperity, businesses that pay their way. We can do this in a way that is fair for business and fair for society. Conference, I ask you to support this motion.
Thank you very much. Would the mover of Amendment 2, Oliver Craven, please stand by? And I now call Nessa McAlane to move Amendment 1.
Tax is sometimes seen as a dull subject. In fact, it's only ever half of the story. The other half of the story is how the money is spent and the public goods that are bought. Our amendment on our amendment, the other part of the story is about foreign aid, and it's the help that HM Revenue and Customs gives to emerging countries around the world in designing tax transparency in their own systems. And this scheme goes until 2023. After that, it could disappear, it might not be renewed, it might be turned into something else. The two ministers who are, in theory, guardians of this scheme at the moment are Sajid Javid and Liz Truss. So it's partly because of that we are putting down this amendment to safeguard the scheme. Just to give you a bit of an idea of how much we can help, Rwanda is one of the countries we've been helping in recent years, and it's become, as you know, one of the great success stories in Africa, and the African Development Bank attributes much of this success to its very modern tax system and its electronic payment scheme. South Africa is another interesting case. South Africa isn't getting help from us directly, but South Africa has modelled its very modern tax scheme partly on ours. And as you may know, by the year 2026, South Africa plans to have an NHS in place to cover the whole country, the whole population. And that is very much the only reason that they are able to do that is because they have this modern tax scheme which is relatively transparent and through which tax is collected electronically. Tax transparency reduces the possibilities for corruption and for non-payment because complexity is the friend to corruption and to non-payment. The design and marketing of tax schemes have a huge effect on whether the money comes in. I could just give you an example of the TV licensing system in Italy. Licensing for TV, of course, is a kind of tax. And they work on a calendar year, so every January, the equivalent of the BBC, RAI, runs numerous little adverts on television to tell you to pay your tax, your license fee. And if you watch any TV at all, you can easily end up watching 90 of these advertisements during the month of January. Well, as any child can tell you, if someone tells you 90 times to do something, it probably means that most people aren't doing it. And that's one of the reasons why they don't raise that much money on licenses for the TV in Italy. Some people here today might say that we should restrict this motion to our domestic tax system, but I'd like to say that by helping other countries become more transparent, we eventually become more transparent ourselves. We would have not just a better tax system, which we could all understand, but a better welfare benefit system, because the two are completely enmeshed together. It would make it much easier for people to claim benefits, universal credit, for instance. We should all be able to do our own tax returns and make our own benefit claims. Tax and benefit system are too often used as ways of confusing ordinary people. It's a scam in those cases on the whole country if you can't understand your tax return. So please support this amendment. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would the mover of Amendment 3, Paul Brown, please stand by? And I now call Oliver Craven to move Amendment 2.
Conference. This motion as it stands is at odds with the ideals of EU tax harmonisation and attempts to restrict our ability to decide when in government where to place our corporate tax rate, potentially stopping us from raising additional money for some of our very important policies. There are a number of concerns we had with this motion. We set nominally positive goals, but in some cases lacks the context of other Liberal Democrat policy or a workable framework for the implementation of those ideas. We attempted to put forward a wide-ranging amendment that would have fixed many of these issues, but were only permitted to move this clause, which you should support as it provides a significant improvement by allowing for greater economic flexibility and ease of international harmonisation than the motion provides for. One specific issue that we noticed and tried to amend was that parliaments cannot bind future parliaments, making any promise of a long-term stable tax rate meaningless unless the movers of the motion are naive enough to think the Liberal Democrats will win every election ever. Our amendment removes needless restrictions and hyperbolic language to ensure that we can introduce good, evidence-based policy the next time we are in government. It allows us the flexibility to decide where best to place our corporation tax rates. Whilst a higher corporate tax rate need not be our policy, especially given Liberal Democrat policy to tax wealth in the form of land values, as a pro-European party, should we really pretend that the policies pursued by economically successful European friends such as Germany and Austria represent some form of unique attack on business? Our policy should allow us to follow the evidence. It should allow us to align with our European partners. It should allow us to raise the money we need to pay for our most important policies. Conference, please vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Will Alan Guy of Stratford-on-Avon please stand by? And I now call Paul Brown to move Amendment 3. Paul Brown. Is Mark Lunn in the hall to move Amendment 3? Would any members like to move Amendment 3? If that's a genuine offer, sir, you're welcome to move Amendment 3. Yes, please. If you can go round there, and one of the stewards will show you where to come round to get on. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you everyone for your patience. We're just going to make sure that the speaker is mic'd up. He's very kindly offered to move Amendment 3 for us. So if you just wouldn't mind waiting for a moment while we get him sorted with a microphone, it won't be too long. Now might be a good time to have a look at your conference daily and check out the options for the emergency motions ballot, which closes at 12:50 today. You can have a look and make your vote. We've got 2 spaces for debate, and you can pop it in the ballot box just down here at the front. Thank you. I'd like to welcome Michael Steed to move Amendment 3.
Right. Fellow Liberals, fellow Liberal Democrats, this is my, I don't know how many conferences, I've missed 1 or 2. My first was at Llandudno in 1962. I have never volunteered from the floor to move an amendment before, but if you look at your conference daily, and turn to the notice of emergency motions, you will see that there is an emergency motion number 4, emergency motion Freeports, which sets out the case extremely clearly for why we should oppose Freeports. I therefore see no reason to make a speech. I therefore move formally that we add this amendment to the motion.
Thank you very, very much. Much appreciated. I would now like to ask Susan Kramer to stand by, and I would invite Alan Guy from Stratford-on-Avon, please. Sorry, yes, please.
Madam Chairman, colleagues, thank you. First to say that I totally applaud the aims of this motion, particularly the principle that more equity in business taxation is critically important. Also the concept of simplification and transparency. However, in its current form, I believe the motion has one major weakness. It is completely neutral over the matter of environmental behaviour. There is a serious danger of silo thinking, as the business tax motion should not work in isolation from our environmental aims. We are frequently being told that action on, for example, the climate change emergency should run through every area of our policy. Why are these points important? Firstly, from 40 years of business experience, I can tell you that business taxes and allowances are 2 of the most effective drivers of business behaviour. The party's business taxation policy must reward good environmental behaviour, and penalise poor environmental behaviour. Otherwise, frankly, its effect on business and industry will be greatly weakened. Just to put this in context, I can ask two rhetorical questions. Firstly, do you feel that businesses should be given allowances against tax for investing in major carbon-reducing measures? I do. For example, if the government offered major tax incentives to chemical companies like INEOS if they invested in actual recycling of plastics back to base monomers, surely this would be a good thing. Rhetorical question 2. Do you think that British Petroleum should be taxed at the same rate on the sale of hydrocarbons as Siemens, who are manufacturing wind turbine blades at Hull? I do not think so. So, just in brief summary, I believe that the party's business taxation policy should be adjusted to provide real incentives to all businesses, from retail through to manufacturing, to use practices which protect the environment. And just incidentally, I believe that the business taxation policy should move coherently with the climate change motion and policy which is to be debated on Monday. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much. Before we move on, I just want to mention that we do still have some opportunities to speak in this debate. So if you're intrigued by what you've heard and want to have your voice heard, please put in a speaker's card down here. And I would now like to ask Karen Young from St Albans to stand by and invite Susan Kramer from Twickenham and Richmond to come up and speak. And obviously Susan is one of our Treasury spokespeople in the Lords.
Thank you very much, Conference. Can I just say I was totally won over by the Freeports Amendment and the Speaker moving it. But I wanted to speak in this debate in part because I wanted to say a thank you. The task force that sits behind the paper and the motion has done incredible work over a couple of years. So we're very lucky to have people who have both Liberal Democrat values and tax expertise in our party, and we've made full use of them. So they've also had to negotiate their way through everybody else's responsibilities. So that is why at the beginning Martin was explaining to you they didn't touch on business rates, they haven't touched on personal taxes. And I would say to the last speaker, with whom I have a great deal of sympathy, it's one of the reasons why they haven't looked at environmental taxes, because that scope fell under the task force that was looking at environmental and climate change issues. It's a little bit artificial as a division, I agree with that completely, but that is the reason why that's not wrapped into this motion. That's part of the content, if you like, of a motion that we will deal with in much broader terms and with a great deal more context on Monday. What I like so much about this motion is it sets out a series of principles that we should use as we reshape the business side of the tax system. And if you read it, it sets out what is expected of businesses, essentially that they should pay their fair share, including shouldering their share of paying for public services, and they should do so transparently. No more shifting profits abroad, but taking an honest responsibility as they look at their tax strategies. But it also recognises that we need successful growing businesses to provide for our prosperity. And so there's attention to what business needs most from the tax system. And as Martin has said, that is clarity and consistency. It needs incentives also to invest and thrive and grow. But I have to say that clarity and consistency are, if anything, more important than the actual level of tax. And the principles fit within the wider expectation of this party that we have for business. You will hear around different aspects of the party phrases like a new social contract for business with the community, that's in which we allow and make sure businesses can thrive, but the business in turn that accepts a role of stewardship not just to its shareholders, but to the community, to consumers, to employees, suppliers, and very importantly, the environment and climate change. So the whole framing of principles sits very squarely within that particular context, and that, I must say, is its strength. The contrast with the two other parties, frankly, is stark. I mean, Corbyn and MacDonald just can't get past the class warfare view of private bad, success bad, profits bad. But the Tories also are desperately hoping that businesses, furious with them now because of Brexit, will be mollified by corporate tax cuts and deregulation. Can I just say that the current Tory action of cutting corporation tax to 17% has to be one of the stupidest policies of a rather stupid Tory government. In conversations with business, and I and others have had many of these conversations, I am now certain that not one single penny has been invested in the UK because corporation tax is promised at 17% rather than 20%. It has not had a nudge effect. It has not stimulated economic growth in any way. It has merely been an ideological issue, an attempt to curry favour with chief executives. I am very pleased that in a very Liberal Democrat way, the motion recognises that on tax issues, as on so many others, the UK needs to work internationally. We have to take a lead, but we also need to join with others and take our value, and especially those who share our values, to take a stand against both countries and companies that try and play the system. And again, you will see that this motion underpins that. It's really a shocker to me that if Brexit succeeds, we will lose our crucial voice on this approach to tax within the EU. And frankly, if we're not heard within the EU, we won't be heard in the wider international community either.
Can you draw your remarks to a close, please?
Thank you. All I want to do is basically reinforce the idea that there will be further motions, other papers. This is only part of action on a much broader context. The paper is a very important step and a very important framework, and I do hope that conference will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask Lee Howgate from Torbay to stand by, please? And I call Karen Young from St Albans, who will be speaking for the motion as a whole and against Amendment 2.
Morning, conference. I have to say that my first reaction on reading the motion was that it was a statement of the obvious. Why on earth should it be necessary to state something that is so sensible, transparency, things that business really want? I have worked in the corporate side of tax for a very long time, and I can assure you all that clarity and consistency and a vision, knowledge of what's going to happen in the medium-term future is an extremely important factor in making planning decisions. So I thoroughly support the approach in this motion, setting out the principles that we should be following. I think it is astonishing that we are outliers as Liberal Democrats in making such statements. It's something that really is astonishing that the other parties do not agree with. So I thoroughly support the motion, and I urge you to do so too. As a vis-a-vis Amendment 2, the range of taxes in Europe are so wide, it is essentially a meaningless amendment. You have Irish tax rates which are extremely low, around 11%, other tax rates going up to 33%. If we have to look at that broad range, essentially we can decide whatever we want with that comparison. It makes no sense. It also as someone has said, I think implies that we would have a constant review of rates against that international norm, and I think that is extremely unhelpful. Yeah, I commend the motion to everyone.
Thanks very much. Would Stephen Arundale from Edinburgh West please stand by? And I now call Lee Howgates from Torbay, who will be speaking in favour of Amendment 3.
Good morning, conference. I'm a PPC for Torbay and a first-time speaker at conference, so I'm delighted to have this opportunity. And I'm speaking in favour of Amendment 3, which is the amendment on free ports. I think it's interesting to note that the European Commission itself has discussed the nature of free ports and their increase in popularity over the last few years. And it is quite candid in its language. It talks about them as opportunities for money laundering, tax evasion and tax avoidance. And it further notes that their popularity has increased in recent years, largely because of a very effective crackdown by national governments on bank secrecy and tax evasion. So it's no mystery that Boris Johnson, as our new Prime Minister, is very keen on the concept of free ports. He sees this as a very backdoor measure to avoiding the tariffs that his policies are going to create and erect with our nearest and most important trading partners. They're wrong on several levels. They're wrong in principle, but they're also wrong in terms of the fact that the policy was originally conceived as a policy that made sense, where you had a ring-fenced enclave, so a kind of Kaliningrad to the rest of the Russian Federation, something of that nature. And for those of you who know anything about Kaliningrad, you will know very well the kind of hellhole that results actually from that, even with the best of intentions. So if we think about the kind of goods that are brought into a free port, high-value art, for example, high-value items will be there, and they are there for mysterious lengths of time with mysterious owners. The ultimate beneficial owner is hardly ever noted and recognised. So these things are essentially a boon to the organised white-collar criminal. We should have nothing whatsoever to do with them, conference. I also think that they are a dreadful example of a misconceived idea on taxation. It's not about genuine stimulation of entrepreneurialism and business. It's actually about the substitution of trade from one area to the next. So we can consider a free port as an area rather like a black hole that will suck in activity at the expense of other areas around it. So in my part of the world, in South Devon, where we have an incredible degree of increasing child poverty and pensioner poverty, there would be a fight, pork barrel politics of the worst kind, to be chosen as one of those 10 zones. And Torbay's gain would be somebody else's loss. I put it to you, even if Torbay was one of the 10 areas chosen, that it would still be the wrong policy. I think it's also important to note more positively that other opportunities exist to actually create that dynamic economy that we all wish to see. I want to refer specifically to one such example. EMI, the Enterprise Management Incentive. This is something that gives an effective tax rate of 10% to shares owned by employees in a small or medium enterprise. As Liberals, I think it ticks many of our boxes in terms of increasing employee ownership and their incentive to work harder for the companies of which they find themselves an employee. And it's right to reward the entrepreneur who might be putting their house to mortgage or increasing their mortgage to drive that business forward, that they should have the incentive of a 10% tax rate rather than the full rate of capital gains tax, or as it will be when we harmonise it, the full rate of personal taxation. So I think it's important to consider that such a tax is the right way forward rather than free ports, and we should perhaps look to actually decrease the tax on something like EMI rather than go down the Freeport route. Thank you very much, Conference.
Thank you very much. Could I ask Sam Al-Hamdani to stand by, please? And I now call Stephen Arundale from Edinburgh West, who will be speaking for the motion as a whole.
Good morning, Conference. I'm speaking today in support of this motion, and particularly around the simplification element of UK business taxation. The specific area of interest that I have is the off-payroll working rules, sometimes known as IR35. These rules are in place to enable specialists in areas such as IT, finance and change management to provide their services to end clients via an intermediary, often their own limited company. This type of resource is an essential part of the resourcing profile of end client companies such as banks and financial services corporations who, without this, would not have the flexibility to deliver large, ad hoc pieces of discretionary change, therefore significantly impairing their ability to innovate and putting at risk the UK's reputation of having one of the most cutting-edge financial services industries in the world. IR35 is currently a notoriously woolly piece of legislation which leads to these limited company owners constantly feeling under the threat of investigation by HMRC if they believe them to be operating in this way erroneously. Investigation is a long and costly process for the limited company, and in the last 10 years, HMRC have only won 7% of the cases that have been brought, yet still they persist. The Conservatives have now introduced an additional piece of legislation due to be passed into law from April 2020, which moves the responsibility onto the end client for ensuring that the limited company is operating correctly under the IR35 rules. This is a direct attack on the industry under the mistaken belief that it would result in an increase in tax intake. In reality, it would mean that the end client companies would move away from temporary engagements, which would not only significantly reduce their own capabilities, but would also decrease the overall tax intake due to the change in their engagement basis with that specialist. It's my belief that it should be in the interest of the government via HMRC to make it as easy and simple as possible to understand and comply with tax legislation, not to make the rules complex and vague, in what the more cynical amongst us could interpret as creating opportunities to catch people out through misinterpretation of the rules. I would therefore ask you to support this motion because it is poorly constructed business tax rules such as these which is inhibiting the ability of small businesses to prosper and grow and provide the innovative drive which will enable the UK private sector to remain at the cutting edge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Conference, Stephen was a first-time speaker. I would now like to ask Gareth Epps to stand by, and I call Sam Al-Hamdani from Oldham, who is going to speak in favour of the motion as a whole.
Good morning, Conference, and thank you. I'd like to speak in favour of the principles of this motion, about fairness, about transparency, liberal values that underpin the ideas behind it. We live in a country where tax avoidance, sadly, is endemic. And by that I mean the principle of paying what you think you can get away with. There are too many businesses, as we know and as we hear about in the papers, that do their best to minimise what they pay. And we've long held in this party a policy of a percent on income tax to pay for improvements to the NHS. But a conservative estimate of how much money is lost to the exchequer from profit shifting is exactly the amount of money that we would gain by that percent on income tax. Now, a fairer system would not automatically get rid of that tax avoidance, but it begets the principle that we should pay a fair amount of tax. And if we propose a simple method of gathering that tax and showing people that we are fair in our principles and transparent in our approach, then that is the first step towards cutting that. In this motion, we talk about supporting HMRC in being able to fund the analysis of what's going on, in being able to pursue people who are avoiding the tax that they owe. Because it's important that there are practical elements to follow those principles. But we need together to show that our approach to tax is one that shows that we are all together in this. That tax is a ladder that allows the people who are coming after us. If we are successful in business, we want the next generation to come through. And paying a fair amount of tax is allowing that to happen. So the principle behind this is a great principle. It shows that we must be honest about what we are doing, and we must expect of business the transparency that they are honest in it too. If we lead, we show the example, and we expect businesses to be honest in their dealings. We need to go further. The motion talks about the need for an international consensus on improving the tax strategy worldwide, and there will not be change until that is done. But this principle that we have in this motion shows that we are in favour of this idea that together we can work to improve the tax system, to make it fairer, to make it transparent on our side, and to demand that businesses do the same. If you look at the accounts of the businesses that are avoiding taxes, it is almost impossible to find out where they are going wrong currently. You can see where they are paying tax or where they are not paying tax. You can't work out what they are doing. So it is vital that we lead the way and show them that they must be transparent in their dealings. And if we do that, businesses will work with us as a government and as a nation to provide a better society. This motion is a tiny first step on that route, but it's a first step that we must take, and then together we can make a great leap. Thank you. I commend the motion.
Thank you, and Sam is also a first-time speaker at conference. I'd now like to ask Simon McGrath to stand by, and I call Gareth Epps from Witney, who will be speaking in favour of the motion as a whole and of Amendment 2.
Thank you, conference. I'm not sure I can quite match the eloquence of that last speaker, but I shall try, at least in places. I, in recent years, have formed my own company and have been plunged in direct to the world of business taxation. We have talked as Liberal Democrats for many years about the need for tax to be fairer, simpler and honest. I've sat on the last two party tax working groups, and I have to say that the quest for tax simplification, which has been the thrust of our policy on business tax for some time, has been a mantra. But it's very easy to say that you're in favour of tax simplification, but it's far less easy to do. The speaker who put the case about IR35, that is a great example of the gulf between this Tory government's rhetoric and the reality as far as making business tax simpler goes. And this amendment creates a far stronger basis for reforming business tax in a way that many businesses will benefit from. The speaker from St Albans will know of the campaign in that great city for business rate reform, supported by Daisy Cooper and the Liberal Democrats, fought by a group of pubs in St Albans called Save St Albans Pubs. Last year, we debated business rates and the need to radically reform those, and I'm very glad that we carry on to do that. But I didn't quite follow her argument when she argued in favour of the lines in the original motion that seek to perpetuate the race to the bottom. Liberal Democrats simplifying tax for business should be about transparency and fairness. It should not be in any way a race to the bottom. Now, Amendment 2 fixes that, because the lines in the motion, lines 37 to 45, although it won't come up on your apps as I just found to my cost, seeks to fix corporation tax levels at a rate that our economy, given the current incumbents in number 10, may not shortly no longer be able to sustain. This amendment sets out a case for giving us the flex to focus on the simplicity that's argued for about business tax and corporation tax, to help either sole traders like myself or the biggest companies who currently avoid paying their tax, without giving unnecessary perks possibly to placate the Daily Mail. Please support Amendment 2 and then support the motion as a whole.
Thank you very much. I would now like to ask Nick Eden-Green to stand by to summate on Amendment 1, and I call Simon McGrath from Merton, who is going to speak against Amendment 2.
Thank you. Conference, I would like to ask you to vote against Amendment 2, and particularly I'd like to ask you to vote against the proposal that we bring our corporation tax rates in line with those in Europe. That sounds like the sort of thing we should be in favour of, but what I'd like you to think about is Joe Swinson being interviewed by Andrew Neil. And Andrew Neil asks her what our policy is on our tax rate, and she says, if we pass this, to bring them in line with the rest of Europe. Well, our European neighbours, are we going to bring them in line with Ireland, which is 12.5%? Are we going to bring them in line with Belgium, which is 29%? With France, which is 34%? With Germany, which is 15% but has all sorts of regional surcharges on top? Or even with Hungary, which is 9%? There isn't one rate of tax in Europe, but the rates of tax vary enormously, even amongst the closest countries to us in Europe, and therefore it is meaningless to say that we're going to bring our corporation tax rates in line with them. Now, there is something that we need to do with our European partners, and even further afield, something that the motion calls for, which is to work with them to close the tax loopholes that there are. The problem is often not the main tax rate in Europe, it's all the loopholes. It's the double Irish, which Amazon famously use, and the Dutch sandwich, which a lot of other multinationals use. Those are the problems that we need to close, and those will be closed by working with our European partners, not trying to harmonise with a whole series of entirely different rates across Europe. So I please support the motion and oppose Amendment 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I ask James Bailey to stand by to summate on Amendment 2? And I now call Nick Eden-Green from Canterbury, who will be summating Amendment 1.
Conference, when Paddy Ashdown came to Canterbury a good few years ago to talk about the place of democracy in developing countries, he stressed that for democracy to flourish, you first need the rule of law and a level of economic wealth to ensure stable government, and how right Paddy was. Developing countries need schools, they need education, they need a health service, they need doctors, they need teachers, they need police. All of these are necessary, and that means in turn that they need to build a higher and a proper taxation system which is transparent and sustainable. Only that way can they deliver those vital public services. This amendment expands the international aspect of the motion. It demonstrates the Lib Dem commitment to international aid by helping developing nations to develop transparent tax systems. I ask you to support the amendment because I believe Conference is the right place to make clear our international values and our international stance on taxation. HMRC is contributing to the long-term stability and prosperity of selected low and middle-income countries now. Its tax-building capacity unit in the UK has helped developing nations to engineer their tax systems so that they can benefit from international tax transparency standards. But the current programme is not guaranteed beyond 2023. Its future's under threat from Truss and Javid and the present government, which seems hell-bent on turning a foreign aid policy into a foreign trade policy. Aid is vital. HMRC says that towards the end of the capacity building programme, HM Treasury and the Department for International Development will take a decision regarding the continuation of the programme. We know what that means. We know that it's under threat. We know it may not be continued. Conference, that is not just a threat to a fair and honest tax system for those nations, it's actually a threat to their democracy and to their future. And this amendment supports the continued valuable role that HMRC plays in developing fair, transparent, and utterly necessary local tax regimes. Indeed, it requires that to be expanded and continued beyond 2023. All nations need good, stable public services. They've got to be paid for by fair taxes. This amendment underlines our role in meeting the need that protects and nurtures the route to stable, democratic government in low and middle income nations. Please, please support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we move to the next speaker, I just want to mention, I did mention at the start, if you intend to vote in this debate, if you're sitting right at the back beyond these sort of brown hoardings, if you could move down so that we can make sure that you're counted in the vote. Also, just to mention that the original mover and summator of Amendment 3 aren't in the hall, although it was very kindly moved by a gentleman. As it's not been opposed, we won't need to have a speech in summation. So I would ask Anthony Harris to stand by, and I call James Bailey to summate on Amendment 2.
Thank you. So yes, as we've heard in the proposal speech for this amendment, what this amendment tries to do is to provide us, provide future governments with the flexibility that we need to modify tax rates according to what other European countries are doing, because harmonization doesn't necessarily mean you literally have the same tax rate as all your partners. That's a rather confusing idea that Simon seemed to have brought into this. Rather, harmonization means you listen to your partners and take that into account, and take into account changes in the economy. We are in an exceptionally volatile political and economic situation, tying us, as the motion as written does, to the idea that a tax rate 3 points lower is the worst thing in the world, and a tax rate 4 points higher is the worst thing in the world, is deeply irresponsible at a time when we need to be thinking about how do we rebuild our public services. As Baroness Kramer said, I'm very grateful to her for saying so, this motion is only setting out part of our business tax policy. So why, then, should we be setting in the motion guidelines on the precise number when we're not taking into account in this motion what the rates of land value tax should be, what the rates of environmental taxes should be? And that was a very good speech on why we need to take those things into account that we had earlier in the debate. So fundamentally, given that those other aspects of our tax policy are not included here, trying to hammer down, as the motion does, precisely what the ideal Goldilocks rate should be, not too hot, not too cold, risks us bringing an incoherent policy together when it is put side by side with other parts of the taxation policy that we are developing as a party. The idea of locking ourselves down as well risks, if there were to be an economic downturn, if there were to be needs for additional funding for government, not so much stability as flat-footedness in the face of economic change. Again, this would not be a responsible thing for the party to do, and it would risk policies that we want to put forward in a whole host of other areas if, for example, it turned out that we actually needed additional taxation to fund some of our commitments on healthcare, on education, and so on and so forth. The idea, as given in this original motion, that the putting a 26% tax rate is a uniquely penal attack on business would, I think, come as a surprise to the most recent government of the country I live in, Austria, which has been the most Thatcherite right-wing government that that country has had in the post-war era, and still has set a tax rate at 25%. I think the Austrian Conservatives would be a little surprised to find that they were the natural enemies of business. And so, please, conference, support this amendment, because we need to be building a policy that allows us to deliver an overall social liberal program. We need to be building a policy that allows us to meet our commitments in all sorts of areas. And we need to be building a policy that, as and when we do end up taking part and putting these policies forward, we need to have a policy that is flexible in the face of the very volatile circumstances that we are currently facing. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll be moving to the votes after this last speech, and I now call Tony Harris to summate the motion.
Conference. If you have run a business in this country or you've been involved in running a business, then you will be able to identify with the principles that underpin this motion. The existing business taxation system in the UK especially is not fit for purpose and needs reform. When systems are too complicated, it means that there are many places to hide, many places to avoid, and many places to game the system. It was with these issues in mind that Vince Cable originally set up a business tax working group in late 2016, as Susan said. The work of the group was unexpectedly interrupted in 2017 when Vince became leader and I took up the position of working chair in autumn of that year. My grateful thanks to Tim Farron for setting up the group and also to Vince for all the work that he did in getting it underway. A panel of experts in law, tax, accounting, tax for business and economics has put together this particular motion that you see, and my grateful thanks to all of the members of the committee, and I know they'd want me to recognise Martin Wheatcroft particularly, who moved the motion, for all the drafting work that he did to get this draft to the point that it is today. Conference. You will have noticed that there are 3 amendments which have been submitted for the motion. The committee support Amendment 1, and our thanks to all those who supported it and spoke in favour of that motion. HM Revenue and Customs already help developing countries as part of the work of its tax capacity building unit, and we support this ongoing initiative. Therefore, we support Amendment 1, and my thanks to the mover and the summator for their very clear and cogent arguments. Amendment 3 refers to the setting up of free ports, a Tory initiative. Although the work of this committee is focused on business taxation and free ports have more to do with VAT and customs duty, we are content to accept this amendment into the motion because we agree with its principles. And again, our grateful thanks to Martin Steed for stepping in at the last minute to move the motion and the various speakers who spoke in favour. However, as Martin Wheatcroft has already said, and as Simon said as well, we do not support Amendment 2. Corporation business tax in Ireland is 12.5%, tax in Holland 25%, and tax in Germany is 38%. There is no such thing as a harmonised European tax system. We should not be hitching our business stars to a shooting star. We need something that's stable. We need something that we can allow our business to plan against, and therefore I urge you to reject Amendment 2. My thanks to Gareth Epps for supporting the motion as a whole, but I must disagree with him. Amendment 2 is not something that should be part of this. Having said that, we agree that stabilising a tax rate in government is difficult, but we still think it should be a Liberal Democrat objective. Oliver Cohen moved Amendment 2. He made the point that we could not guarantee that a policy would be supported by future governments, but sadly, that is the reality for any policy from any political party in our electoral system. So we support the idea of Amendments 1 and 3, but not Amendment 2. Conference. It is important that the Liberal Democrats have a policy in business taxation that is easy to understand, easy for our leader and MPs to articulate, and easy for a Liberal Democrat government to implement when we come to power. I urge you to support this motion, to accept Amendments 1 and 2, and to reject Amendment 3. Thank you. Sorry? Oh, sorry, what did I say?
Do you want to just repeat your quick summation?
Yes. Sorry.
I urge you to support the motion, to accept Amendments 1 and 3, and to reject Amendment 2.
Thank you very much. We're now going to be moving to the votes. I just want to remind anybody that arrived late again that we'll, if you are sitting beyond the sort of yellowy brown bit at the back there, if you could move down if you want your vote to be counted. I also just want to mention the gender balance of the speakers in the debate. It did reflect the cards that I had in. So we'll now move to the votes. I'll take the amendments in turn, and then finally we'll take the vote on the substantive motion. Please have your voting cards ready with the word voting facing me. So on Amendment 1, can I see all those in favour of Amendment 1, please? Thank you very much. And all those against? That's very clearly carried. Thank you. On Amendment 2, could I please see all those in favour of Amendment 2? And all those against, please. That's clearly defeated. Thank you. People who are just arriving, if you do want to vote, please could you take a seat? And finally, on Amendment 3, could I see all those in favour of Amendment 3? And all those against? Thank you. That's clearly carried. So finally, on the substantive motion as amended, please could I see all those in favour? And all those against? Thank you very much. That's clearly carried. Thanks to everybody that took part in the debate. I'm sorry that for anyone that we didn't have time to call. Thank you very much to my aides, Jeff Payne and Simon McGrath. And I will now hand over to Nick DaCosta, who's chairing the next item. Before I do, I just want to mention very quickly that we do have a bit of a problem with the electronic speakers cards. So if you want to submit a speakers card, please do so on the hard copies down here. And we now move to item 8, a speech from Vera Hobhouse. Thank you.
Good morning, conference. Before we move on to our next item, can I ask those who are leaving to do so quietly and those who are coming in to take their seats so we can start promptly. Also, just like to point out to those who might want to be asking Vera some questions, there will be a Q&A on climate change with Vera Hobhouse, Ed Davey and Carolyn Voden this afternoon at 3 in Bayview Room 2. So on that note, conference, I would now like to welcome Vera Hobhouse, MP for Bath, and our spokesperson on climate change to the stage.
Hello, everybody.
It is wonderful to see you all here at the beginning of a great conference. We are in a very good place. Look at what we have achieved since our last conference only 6 months ago. Numbers of councillors up. Number of MEPs up. Numbers of MPs up. Membership up. Polling up. Is there anything that can stop us now? Here's an easy question. Who in this hall is a Liberal Democrat? And who in this hall believes the climate crisis is the biggest challenge of the future and we have a moral duty to solve it? Think about it. This is who we are. Being a Liberal Democrat and being an environmentalist go hand in hand. Our values for a free, open, tolerant, and globally fair society place us right in the center of the fight against global climate chaos. Let me remind you of our preamble of our Constitution. The Liberal Democrats exist to build and safeguard a fair, free, and open society in which we seek to balance the fundamental values of liberty, equality, and community, and in which no one shall be enslaved by poverty, ignorance, or conformity. We fundamentally believe that all people are equal and have an equal right to freedom and prosperity. That freedom and prosperity for all has to be fought for and safeguarded because it is easily threatened. Nobody can be free who lives in poverty. Nobody is free when displaced or threatened by war. The climate crisis will affect us all. If we allow it to get worse, it will create huge global inequalities. Some parts of our planet will be much worse hit than others, creating extreme poverty, hardship, displacement, and possibly war. We Liberal Democrats make no distinction between people on the basis of race, gender, or religion. It matters deeply to us how other people are doing, not just in this country, but anywhere in the world. That is what makes us an internationalist party. People in China or Argentina or Nigeria or Iran are our neighbors. That is why we call out against human rights abuses wherever we witness them. And that is why we feel particularly called upon to avert a climate catastrophe. This is our call. This is who we are. This is why each and every one of us should be proud to be a Liberal Democrat. The rise of populist and nationalist leaders across the world directly threaten our democratic values. It threatens the institutions that have guaranteed our rules-based international order. But additionally, what is staring us in the face now is that these populist and nationalist leaders threaten our efforts to tackle the climate crisis. Whether it is Trump, or Bolsonaro, or Putin, or any other dictator across the world, they all actively encourage activities that create environmental chaos, division, social instability, and economic disruption. Because these are the conditions on which they thrive. Populist leaders create and deliberately exaggerate the fear of foreigners. They use this fear for their own personal and self-centered ambitions. Fear is a powerful emotion that blocks out any rational arguments. We cannot ignore the huge dangers to international peace and cooperation that these authoritarian leaders pose. Climate breakdown will play into their hands. The potentially huge displacement of people give the perfect excuse for populist leaders to shut down the borders and pull up the drawbridge. The cry of each and every one of these leaders is, my country first. They do not care about anyone else. Look at the devastating destruction of the rainforest. It would be naive to think that Bolsonaro turns a blind eye for mere short-term financial gain and has no regard for the long-term global implications of such destruction. More important to realize is that burning down the rainforest and exacerbating the climate crisis is consistent with his disruptive political agenda. It matters to stand up against these populists and nationalists, not just because of the threat to our society, but because of the threat to our planet. We must fight this. That is why we are in politics. That is why we are Liberal Democrats. Our Liberal Democrat resurgence in the local and European elections give me great hope. There are millions of people who will not lie down in the face of populism and nationalism. We must stand with them and lead them. We need to encourage action at every level, from the individual to the international. In my constituency in Bath, we swept the board in the local elections in May. My council, along with many of your councils, have now declared a climate emergency. In contrast to other parties, we are not just paying lip service to this commitment. We are actively and seriously preparing the way to a net zero future. My council colleagues have taken immediate action after winning in May. They have created a cabinet member for climate change. All council departments now have to place a climate emergency at the heart of all decision-making. We are preparing for local engagement events, and we have started to talk to every player across the council area. We are engaging with our 2 universities, our schools, our hospital, our water company, our energy providers, our bus company. We are making sure that each and every one of them take responsibility for their carbon footprint and drive it to net zero. We are good at listening to our communities. We are good at partnership working. We are good at local action because we are Liberal Democrats. We are not in government for the moment, but many of the policies we want for the whole of the UK are being worked out in your and my council areas. It is Liberal Democrat councillors and activists trying out and sharing ideas. And we always use evidence to improve what we do. In the years when we were in government, our record on climate change was very good. With Ed Davey, Chris Huhne, Vince Cable and Joe Swinson, we made renewable energy happen. The UK was a pioneer in reducing greenhouse gases. But what have the Tories done about the climate emergency in the last 4 years? Apart from Theresa May's legacy bill committing the UK to net zero by 2050, the Tories have destroyed almost every bit of progress that we made during the coalition years. They privatized the Green Investment Bank, one of the drivers of change towards a net zero future. They have scrapped the Department for Energy and Climate Change. They have taken away every incentive to drive forward solar energy. They have completely stopped any further development of the onshore wind industry, now the cheapest form of renewable energy. They have blocked development of tidal power, they have destroyed the Green Deal, and they have done nothing to build more carbon zero homes. It must stop. But they support fracking. Nothing tells me more that the Tories haven't got it. Have they not read the science? Fracked fuel is a fossil fuel. In net zero Britain, there is no place for fossil fuels. Supporting the development of any new fossil fuel industry is madness. Fracking must stop. And now, like Trump, Johnson is talking about extreme weather events. He's moving away from the acceptance of climate change. They even talk about reducing fuel treaty. These are the words and actions of climate change deniers. Again, I say, it must stop. It is us who will stop it. Our party has worked out a very detailed policy paper of how we tackle the climate change together. We will debate this on Monday, and I'm looking forward to a very lively session. Our approach is clear. If we know what we need to do, let's do it now. We know how to make renewable energy. Let's do it now. In 2030, 11 years from now, under our plans, 80% of all electricity will be generated from renewables. This is our target. That means solar, marine, onshore, and offshore wind. We know how to decarbonize transport. Let's do it now. From 2030, there will be no sales of new petrol or diesel vehicles. We know how to build energy-effective, efficient homes. Let's do it now. From 2021, all new homes will have a minimum energy efficiency requirement. But there are some sectors where we don't know yet how to get to net zero. Our approach is to get there through innovation. With aviation, we urgently need to find alternatives to jet fuel. This development could take 15 years. Until then, Liberal Democrats will not support any airport expansion across the UK. This approach makes us different from the Green Party. They have no solution for aviation apart from closing it down. For the Green Party, aviation is a problem. For the Lib Dems, jet fuel is the problem. Another example is how we developed so-called negative emission technologies. We need a massive program of tree planting to take out carbon out of the atmosphere. But by itself, that won't be enough. We need to develop and deploy completely new technologies for carbon capture and storage. And we need to make some big decisions about hydrogen and the hydrogen grid. Our Liberal Democrat approach is pragmatic, evidence-based, and decisive. Above all, it is an approach that is pro-innovation. Liberal Democrats will put British innovators at the forefront of the fight against climate change. Liberal Democrats will ensure that British business once again will lead the world in this field. And we will do all this fairly. Fairness means protecting the low pay, the elderly, the just about managing from higher costs. Fairness is understanding that if an electric car costs more, only some people can afford to buy one. Fairness means that the energy efficiency of social housing and rented property is not an optional extra. It's a requirement on the landlord. In the Labour Party, some are true green campaigners, but beware of the rest, who jump on the bandwagon, not to save the planet, but to change society. Getting to net zero does not require a socialist utopia. It does not require a planned economy. For us, climate change is the most pressing issue of our age. For the Labour Party, it will only ever rank as one problem amongst many others. We Liberal Democrats have a long and proud record of environmental campaigning and action. For many years, we have looked at the positive side of doing things differently. Imagine our cities free from pollution, where walking and cycling is the norm. Imagine our children moving around independently, free from the fear of road accidents. It would allow us all to live much healthier and active lives. Imagine our urban spaces free from congestion and noise. Imagine well-designed homes where fuel poverty is a thing of the past. Imagine a natural environment where biodiversity thrives. Imagine the great improvements to our mental health from a life more in tune with nature. Being a Liberal Democrat and being an environmentalist go hand in hand. It is in our DNA. We take the climate crisis extremely seriously, not out of political opportunism, but because we believe in the equal right of everybody across the globe to live a good life, free from fear, free from poverty, free from displacement, free from war. I hope that having a coherent policy will support each and every one of us and guide us as Liberal Democrat councillors, MPs, and activists in our efforts to get to net zero as soon as possible. We have a plan. We will act locally, nationally, and internationally. As Liberals, we are discovering the solutions to the climate crisis through innovation to save our planet from irreversible damage. As Liberals, we are taking on the populists and the nationalists who block international efforts to fight the climate crisis. As Liberals, we are protecting the conditions that underpin our open and tolerant societies. We are not afraid of the challenge. We know what we need to do. We are not afraid to fight. We will fight. We must win.
Thank you very much, Vera Hobhouse. I'd now like to hand over to Duncan Brack, who'll be chairing the next session. Also to say thank you to Victor Chamberlain and Liz Lynn, who are my aides in this session.
Good morning, conference. We're running slightly late, so I'd like to start the next debate as quickly as possible. So if you are leaving the hall, please leave quickly and quietly. Just while people are leaving, I've got 3 announcements to make. First of all, we have resolved the problem with the electronic speakers cards. So if you did submit a speakers cards electronically, you don't need to worry. Secondly, the emergency motions ballot will finish at the end of this session. Conference Daily and the conference agenda say that it'll finish at 12:50, which is precisely when the motion is aimed to end. We will give you a few extra minutes, so you don't all have to rush down to the ballot box before the votes. But remember, you're voting for, we have 2 slots and there are 5 motions, and the ballot box is over there on the table to my right. And then thirdly, as Nick said before me, there are 2 spokespersons Q&A sessions that were inadvertently missed off Conference Daily and also off the conference app, taking place this afternoon. The first one is on climate change with Vera Hobhouse, Ed Davey, and Carolyn Voden. And that's at 3 o'clock here in the conference centre in Bayview 2. And then at 4:30, we have a Q&A with our spokespeople on economy and business. And that's Ed Davey, Chris Fox, and Susan Kramer. That's at 4:30, also in the Bayview 2 room here. Okay, we are now moving on to item F9 on equal marriage. You'll find the motion on pages 16 to 17 of your agenda. There are 3 amendments which we'll debate, which you will find on pages 5 to 6 of the Conference Daily publication out today. And there's also some minor drafting amendments that we've accepted into the motion indicated on Conference Daily. They just bring the motion up to date. So, would Toby Keynes from Sutton please stand by to move Amendment 1? And I'd like to call to the platform to move the main motion, Layla Moran, MP for Oxford West and Abingdon.
Hello, Conference. Our party, the Liberal Democrats, have a long tradition of being the party that stands up for the rights of all. And today's motion is another small step in that journey towards true equality. We were the party that brought the fight to government against Section 28, led by our very own Ed Davey. And we were the party that delivered nearly equal marriage in coalition under the stewardship of the brilliant Lynn Featherstone. But we must know that that fight has never completely been won, and today we begin to close that gap. In my just over 2 years of being an MP, it's clear to me that the forces that wish to suppress our liberal, inclusive values are on the rise. According to Stonewall, the number of people in the LGBTQ+ community who have experienced hate crime is up 80% on last year, with 1 in 5 members of the community experiencing, and that rises to 2 in 5 for the transgender community. We've seen protests outside primary schools trying to promote inclusivity, and as a result, homophobic hate crime has increased by 50% in those surrounding areas. And I remember, as I'm sure many of you did, seeing that story of the 2 women who were assaulted on the bus in London. And I remember my heart leaping out in compassion and sympathy, but also a feeling of fear for what ugliness can lie right on our doorstep. And it must not go unchallenged. Because you see, these stories don't describe the Britain that we believe in. These bigots do not represent our values, and this motion makes that crystal clear. While the Liberal Democrats exist, we will never stop fighting against those forces, and we will always stand up for those who need it the most. Just over a year ago, I had the pleasure of going to Northern Ireland and meeting with our sister party, the Alliance Party. There, I spoke to civil society groups who were campaigning for equal marriage, and I met same-sex couples who felt that they had been completely left behind by the rest of the United Kingdom. In fact, left behind by their own elected representatives. And they felt strongly that if Stormont couldn't get its act together, then Westminster had to do something. Because there, while civil partnerships are allowed, the fact that they can't get married like everyone else makes them feel like second-class citizens. And after all, love is love, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter who with. To not recognize that is a breach of our very basic human rights, and it's an injustice that must be addressed. The motion conference goes on to make clear that it isn't just in Northern Ireland. In fact, across the European Union, there are still countries that haven't come round to this idea. And even worse, across the world, there are countries that fly the British flag and do not allow equal marriage. We call on our government to stand up for all those across the world, and we stand up against discrimination everywhere. The continued fight, however, that I have really struggled with over the last 2 years is one that I've taken to my heart, and that is the fight for the transgender community. I tell you, conference, whenever I go on Twitter or make a speech standing up and campaigning for their rights, that is when I get the most horrific vitriol on Twitter and social media. You know you've made it when they make you a GIF. And I know, however, that there are some people who have now stopped speaking out for them because of that rhetoric. There is a fight on our hands, a fight for the Gender Recognition Act, but today we are discussing the spousal veto. You see, one of the core reasons I am a liberal is because I don't judge someone by their gender, or the colour of their skin, or their class. I care far more for the substance of someone's soul, not the trappings of their position, or indeed the shape of their flesh. You shouldn't be defined by anyone else other than you. And that's what makes the spousal veto such an injustice. Because what it means is that if you are in a marriage and want to transition, your spouse has a veto to stop your true identity from being recognized in law. The fact is, your identity has nothing to do with anyone else. This is deeply personal, and no one, no government, no spouse should be able to veto who you are. I would also like to add my voice to support the amendments that are being discussed today. They show the best of what conference is about, and in so many ways, when you hear them, I hope you'll agree, they are no-brainers. They are welcomed, and they will make our policy even stronger. So, conference, I end by simply saying this. At the heart of this motion lie the values of our inclusive, progressive party that celebrates diversity of people and the love that they have for each other in all of its forms. It's in moments like these that I am most proud to be a Liberal Democrat member, and I urge you to support this motion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Layla. Would Tim Pickstone from Bury please stand by to move Amendment 2? I now call Toby Keynes from Sutton to move Amendment 1.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Conference. 9 years ago next week, we debated that policy motion, Equal Marriage in the United Kingdom. It's centred around the legalisation of same-sex marriages and humanist marriages and the treatment of married transsexuals, and the motion was carried by a huge majority. Just 3 years later, much of that policy, as Layla has just said, became law, but not all of it. This debate is about unfinished business. Today, 6 years after the Marriage Act, 9 years after that debate, we are still making progress. Mixed-sex couples in England and Wales have only had the right to enter a civil partnership for the last 4 months. Same-sex couples in Northern Ireland are still waiting for the right to marry, although they should only have to wait a few more months. But a married trans person still cannot change their legal gender without their spouse's permission. And humanist couples in England and Wales who choose to celebrate their marriage with a humanist ceremony still have to go through the same process with a civic registrar in order to make their marriage legal. Christian marriages, Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, Jewish marriages, all legally recognized, but a humanist marriage ceremony counts for nothing in the eyes of the state. It is a calculated and deliberate insult to every humanist couple that their marriage is not worthy of recognition purely because they are not religious. But I'm afraid the British state has a long history of treating non-religious people, our beliefs, our ceremonies, even our word, as worthless. In 1880, Charles Bradlaugh was elected by the good voters of Northampton. Because he could not in good faith take an oath to a God in which he could not believe, he was denied his seat in the Commons. It was 6 years before he was able to take his seat, and in that time he was sent away 4 times, re-elected 4 times in by-elections, fined twice, imprisoned once, before Parliament finally accepted his right as an atheist to sit in Parliament. And still it continues 50 years, 150 years later. Last year, defence humanists were finally allowed to participate in the cenotaph ceremony of remembrance, laying a wreath on behalf of humanist members of the armed forces, after 8 years of being turned away. The Marriage Act enabled the government to start recognising humanist marriages in England and Wales whenever it chose to do so. We know that there is a huge demand for legally recognised humanist marriages because in Scotland, where they've been recognised since 2005, more couples choose humanist marriages than choose Church of Scotland marriages or Catholic marriages. But Conservative ministers have spent the last 6 years finding excuses for delay, and they are still delaying. Conference, there can be no more excuses. We have waited long enough. Let us finish this business. Let 2020 be the year in which humanist couples marrying in England and Wales are at last treated with the same dignity and respect as religious couples. And let this be under a Liberal Democrat government. Conference, please support humanist marriage. Support Amendment 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. Would Julian Huppert from Cambridge stand by to move Amendment 3? I now call Councillor Tim Pickstone from Bury to move Amendment 2.
Conference. I'd like to first thank Layla and the movers of this motion for bringing before Conference the important issue of equal marriage and some of the further steps that need to be taken to take forward the Same-Sex Marriage Act delivered by this party in government. But Conference, as others have said, there is no such thing as partial equality, and we may well have same-sex marriage now, but we do not have equal marriage. Lesbian, gay and bisexual same-sex couples who are of faith cannot, on the whole, see their marriage recognised in a religious ceremony like their heterosexual peers, and this is wrong. The current Act allows religious organisations to opt in to undertake same-sex marriages, and some great progress has been made. So we must welcome the fact that Unitarians, Quakers, many URC churches, Scottish Scottish churches that begin with an E, liberal Jews, and many others are undertaking same-sex marriages. Significant progress is also underway in the Methodist Church of Great Britain, who are well on way to agreeing to undertake same-sex marriages. But there is an enormous way to go. So wrongly, in my view, the Act specifically said that the Church of England and the Church of Wales were not even allowed to think about undertaking same-sex marriages. Not only was inequality allowed, but inequality is demanded in law, and I believe this is wrong. Many Church of England clergy have been suspended because they've broken the rules and undertaken same-sex marriages, and many in the Church of England and others now wish this rules to be changed. Conference Amendment 2 seeks to change this. It seeks to welcome faith-based same-sex marriages and specifically take away in law the restriction that's placed on the Church of England and Church of Wales from undertaking same-sex marriages. Let us encourage the Church of England to move forward as society has done. So some may say that this is somehow interfering with religious freedom. So I disagree. I will defend your right to have religious freedom, but that does not, in my view, in this liberal society, mean that you have a free pass to discriminate against millions of LGBT+ people. Our society has made massive steps forward in recent years, but every time that homophobia and discrimination is allowed, it reinforces the message to young people growing up today that somehow their lives, their reality, and their sexual orientation are somehow wrong, and nobody, Conference, should have the right to do that. Conference, in the last couple of weeks, you might have thought, particularly if you're unfortunate enough to have Labour trolls in your social media timeline, that this party was somehow not a party that stood up for LGBT rights. What utter rubbish. Whether you've been a member of this party for 60 years or for 6 days, we should be under no illusion that this is the party that has led the fight for LGBT equality. Right from being the first party in the country to commit to lesbian and gay equality right back in our 1979 manifesto, to being the party that delivered same-sex marriage when we had the opportunity in the 2010 government. This party is the party that have led from the front and others have followed. So let us continue to lead this fight, Conference. By passing Amendment 2 today, we'll not only be moving the debate for total equal marriage one massive and important step further forwards, but we'll be continuing that great tradition of Liberal Democrats leading the fight against homophobia and towards equality. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you, Tim. Would Adrian Hivalinen-Trett from Lambeth please stand by? I now call Julian Huppert from Cambridge to move Amendment 3.
Thank you, Conference. And it's good to see you here and good to see us debating this crucial issue. As we've heard, this party has led the way on LGBT plus issues, on equality for all. And there's a reason why we care about issues like this, about issues like the environment, as we heard before. It's because we are liberals. That idea of being a liberal is the basis of everything that we do. It's easy at times like this to focus on other issues, to focus on issues like Brexit. I'm an internationalist because I am a liberal. I'm a passionate European because I'm a liberal, and I will fight to remain because I am a liberal. Those are the values that matter, and the values that all of those of us in the party should aspire to. I want us to see a better, more liberal future for our country in Europe and through subjects like this. We fought for many years, and it was an honour to work with the wonderful Lynn Featherstone to get same-sex marriage there, and there are many others who have done work over the years. Liz Barker, Layla Moran's work now, there are so many. But I would like to pay tribute to three in particular: Jenny Rigg, Sarah Brown and Zoe O'Connell, who have done so much for LGBT rights in this party and in this country. They have made a difference for many years, and I hope that they will be here making a difference for many, many years to come in the future. Now, Sarah Brown actually wrote this amendment, and it will be summated by the other Sarah Brown. And a pro tip is always have a spare Sarah Brown for anything you try and do in the party. Because as we've heard, we got same-sex marriage, and that's fantastic. We did not get equal marriage, and that is something we should not give up on. Many of us fought to get equal marriage. We couldn't get it done. There were Conservatives, there were many others who stopped many of the issues. And this motion goes through many of the pieces that are left. There are other changes. Equal civil partnerships are coming, but there is more to go. And the motion and the amendments pick up many of the things that are still left undone. Because there are injustices. And this amendment particularly deals with a particularly cruel and bizarre injustice. Married couples, happily married couples, or at least as happy as any married couple can be, where one of them wanted to transition, they were told, no, you must first divorce the person you love in order to be allowed to be who you are. I mean, how cruel is that, Conference? The state telling people you must divorce this person for legal detailed reasons. That is cruel and unfair. Now, because of same-sex marriage rules, they can now marry again, but they don't want a second marriage after the one that was stolen from them. They want that first marriage back. We can make sure that that happens. Conference, we led the fight to get a pardon for Alan Turing, undoing an injustice the state did for somebody who was dead and didn't know about it. We should fix injustices even more for people who are still alive, still care, still in love. Conference, as Liberals, we have led the way on equality. This motion, with all the amendments, will continue that fight. Let's make sure we actually get equal marriage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian. Would Jenny Wilkinson from Sutton Coldfield please stand by? I now call to speak in favour of the motion and Amendment 1, Adrian Hivalinen-Trett from Lambeth. Adrian is our PPC for Ipswich and chair of the Humanist and Secularist Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Duncan. Good afternoon, conference. It wouldn't be a speech on equal marriage if I wasn't a little bit to play a part in the role of it, so I'm delighted to be called. I want to particularly emphasise a point about humanists and secularists. Now, I've talked about most things at conference about who I am and what I am, but I've never ever mentioned my faith, or in this case, my belief. And that's why I believe it's really important that we push to have humanist and secularist marriages in England. In Scotland, they are the most progressive form of marriage currently going on. Even our esteemed leader has a humanist marriage. So therefore, there should be absolutely no reason why in England we should have the same progressive and valuable liberal beliefs to be able to do that as well. But as the motion as a whole, I also want to push on two particular elements. One is around transgender rights. As Layla has already very coherently mentioned, those of us who are allies to the transgender community get pilloried as soon as we comment on Twitter or social media. And I'm sure that will happen again today. But I don't care. I will do so. It is my determination that everybody has the rights they want, whoever they are and whoever they love. And that's critical. And for our trans friends, some of which we're sadly missing here at today's conference, but who we still remain good friends with, we want them back, and we also want to make sure that they understand that we support them in their battle to have the same rights as everyone else. Finally, I'd just like to push onto the fact on Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is a part of the United Kingdom, which is why, when I wrote the equal marriage motion we had in 2010, I specifically wrote it as equal marriage in the United Kingdom, not missing out Northern Ireland. And they are still lacking in having those same rules that we all are able to do. So we as a country need to push, and that includes our own government, to push to change those laws so everyone in Northern Ireland has the same marriage rights as we do in the rest of the United Kingdom. Therefore, I support the whole motion and all the amendments, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Adrian. Would Christina Barron from Wells please stand by? And now called to speak in favour of the motion and in favour of Amendment 1, Jenny Wilkinson, who is PPC for Sutton Coldfield.
Good afternoon, conference. I wouldn't describe myself as a humanist. I would usually say I was not religious, with the exception of in the 2000 census, where I declared myself as a Jedi. But one of the things that's really personally important to me is celebrating key milestones in our lives and important life events. With that in mind, when I had my 3 children, I held naming ceremonies for them in lieu of a Christian christening. Those ceremonies were very personal. My husband and I were able to create them ourselves, to design what we wanted, to think about the content, and enjoy celebrating the lives of my children with our friends and our family in a really personal circumstances. Contrast that with my wedding. It was over 20 years ago now, and there weren't many humanist weddings around then. But we were very much constrained by what we were allowed to have. So I had a civil ceremony. Luckily, thanks to the 1994 Marriage Act, I was able to choose a nice venue and got married in a castle. But still, the ceremony itself was not personal and was not what we would have really chosen. It was very much structured and fixed in what we could do, and was conducted by a registrar. Humanists are lacking the freedom of choice that followers of various religions have in terms of what ceremony they have. They're not able to have a ceremony that's legally recognized that reflects their own beliefs. That's wrong and it's discriminatory. I therefore ask you all to vote for Amendment 1 and for the motion as a whole. Thank you, conference.
Thank you, Jenny. Could I ask Helen Belcher from Chippenham, to stand by. And now call to speak in favour of the motion and in favour of Amendment 2, Christina Barron from Wells.
Hello, Conference. Sadly, I'm not a member of Parliament, but I am a member of a legislative body. I'm a member of the General Synod of the Church of England, and I'm the chair of its General Synod Gender and Sexuality Group. If you can think of a better name, I've been looking for a jazzier name for some time, and we're campaigning for equality within the Church of England. Thank you, but I think they take it off my time. I want to talk about this amendment, first of all, to tell you that David Cameron doesn't understand the Constitution of the United Kingdom. The Church in Wales, not the Church of Wales, the Church in Wales is not an established church. There was absolutely Parliament had no business legislating that it couldn't conduct same-sex marriages. It didn't pass such legislation for the Methodists or the Church of Scotland. So that was a mistake. It's never really been admitted, but it was a mistake, and I believe the Archbishop of Wales told David Cameron so. So we should certainly pass this amendment as regards the Church in Wales. And we should say very loudly that Cameron doesn't understand how the United Kingdom works. But as far as the Church of England goes, there is no harm in passing this legislation, but we do have a legislative body in the Church of England that is actually working, well, many members of which are working quite hard to do exactly this. There is no harm in passing this, but actually the General Synod will have to pass something to enable same-sex marriages in the Church of England. I hope it will. I'm working on it. But from the constitutional point of view, we ought really to vote separately on the Church in Wales, because it should never have been included in the legislation in the first place. Let's show David Cameron up and emphasise that. But many, many members of the General Synod, many members of the Church of England would love equal marriages to be possible, and the General Synod's working on it.
Thank you, Christina. Would Florence MacDonald from Camborne, Redruth and Hale please stand by? And now call to speak in favour of the motion, Helen Belcher, our PPC for Chippenham.
Thank you, Duncan, and good afternoon, Conference. I want to talk about two specific things, spousal veto and the stolen marriages, which Julian so eloquently moved as well. Generally, trans issues are pretty poorly understood, which is not surprising because not many people have met trans people. Any trans person who is married must get written permission from their spouse in order to gain gender recognition. Most people think that's not a big deal. But then there are an awful lot of marriages which don't function. The law makes no distinction between happy marriages and those marriages which are currently ending through hostile divorces, where a spouse is absent or where a spouse is incapable. And so the people who are married to those people find themselves stuck, either waiting for a hostile divorce negotiation to go through, or until somebody sadly dies. And it's a really uncomfortable position for those people to be in. I was hoping that my wife would be called, and so I could sort of preface that would be a really historic speech. And she has her own views, because I am trans and we have been married for 25 years. And it's a really onerous thing to be asked to choose between a loving relationship and a recognition of my identity. The other one is in Northern Ireland, trans people must still end their marriage. They must either just dissolve it or try and transfer it into a civil partnership after the gender recognition has been granted. Whilst this affects a few hundred, maybe a few thousand people, it is still egregious and onerous. And this was the case here until 2012. And there may be a couple of hundred couples who are affected by this. And I would really want to emphasize what Julian said. We led the campaign to pardon one man who was dead. We should be fighting for the rights, the equality of a few hundred people who find it difficult to get their voices heard. Conference, I urge you to support the motion. I urge you to vote for all of the motions, but particularly motion 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Would Joanna Belcher from Chippenham please stand by? And I now call Florence MacDonald, our PPC for Camborne, Redruth and Hale, to speak against the motion.
Good afternoon, Conference. My name is Florence MacDonald, and I am indeed the PPC for Camborne, Redruth and Hale. I need to make it clear, first of all, that for the increased rights of the LGBTQ community in Northern Ireland and for the transgender community, I will support today's motion. But I'm here to speak about my concerns on the premise on which our marriage system is built, and also to speak up for a group that has not yet been mentioned today. I'm concerned that we are adding to, taking away from, and extending a marriage system that is at its core fundamentally flawed. It is flawed because it still relies so heavily on gender identification. As someone who is bisexual, I want to know that whether I choose to marry a man or a woman, those acts would be valued in the same way, no matter what setting they were in. Today, I am advocating for a single marriage system for all. In particular, I'm concerned about how our current marriage laws affect those who identify as non-binary. For non-binary individuals, the type of marriage they have will depend on their legal gender, for which the current options are only female and male. For some, this rules out marriage completely. But it highlights a wider issue that I would like you to consider today, the issue that there is no legal recognition of non-binary as a gender option. Even when this is achieved, as I believe it must be, there is no precedent for how a non-binary individual and their partner would fit in with our current marriage system. Will we create a third type of marriage? Or perhaps, rather than adapting a broken system, we should create a new, single, gender-free one, the kind where any two people who love each other can marry. As Liberal Democrats, I believe we must lead the way in removing gender as an obstacle to equal marriage. Let's policy what we preach. Love is love. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would Alex Wilcott from Tower Hamlets please stand by? And I should say we were going to call the next speaker anyway before Helen flagged her up, but it gives me pleasure to invite Joanna Belcher from Chippenham to speak in favour of the motion.
Hi. 16 years ago, I was living with a depressed husband who had recently stood over a railway bridge and seriously contemplated jumping. We had 2 young children. We were both trying to work out the ramifications of the realization that she needed to live her life openly as a woman. This was a traumatic time for both of us. After some time, because same-sex marriage is not the same as a heterosexual marriage, it became clear that in order for my spouse to change her legal gender and for us to remain in our marriage, I would be asked to sign a consent form. I would be asked to say I was happy with her changing her gender. But at that time, I was not happy. I didn't want to sign anything that said this was something I was choosing. I was supporting my other half while trying to hold myself and our family together. But it wasn't my choice. I knew this had to happen, and that a second female parent was way better for our kids than a dead male parent. But it still wasn't my choice. Being asked to consent to this added a stress I could have done without. And it angered me that I could end up being responsible for another person's life journey when it shouldn't have been my decision to make. Looking back, there may be rational arguments I could have made to go through with the request to give consent for her to become legally female. But in the midst of trauma, Most of us struggle to be fully rational. This was a burden I didn't want, a decision that was not mine to make. Only my other half knew who she truly was. Added to this, I personally know people whose spouses, in their pain and anger, used this veto as a weapon to hurt their exes and prevent them from moving on in their lives, dragging out the divorce proceedings and refusing to give consent. What kind of system allows this? Years later, our lives have moved on, but this spousal veto still exists. Lib Dem policy should improve people's lives. Please vote for the amendments and the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Conference, for your information, Joanna was a first-time speaker at conference. Would Hawker Groon from Twickenham and Richmond please stand by, and now call to speak in favour of the motion, Alex Wilcock from Tower Hamlets.
Next month is my 5th wedding anniversary, but my husband Richard and I have been together 25 years. The wait wasn't because we're very traditional and wanted a really long engagement. We had to wait for the Liberal Democrats in government to change the law before we could get married on our 20th anniversary. Thank you. Liberal Democrats have always had the best policy of any party on LGBT plus issues. But it's not just the policies and campaigning issues. For me, it's personal. We got married, but many people still can't. We got married. That's why I can't stand by and say, I'm all right, Jack, never mind the rest of you. I must stand up. We must stand up. Jo Swinson talked about love in her victory speech as leader. This is a simple choice, love or hate. Liberal Democrats are about love and liberty. Now, I take it personally when people tell me I shouldn't have the same rights, that my marriage matters. Is it a matter of conscience? Yes, for the people getting married. But if you want to bully people, to enforce your prejudices on people, to stop people making their own decisions, that's not conscience, it's control. Everything in this motion comes back to the same founding principle, people's right to control their own lives. But it's not just about policy. It's about the face the party shows. I welcome people joining us from other parties. Some will be fully formed Liberals, and some you might have to give more leeway to. Like children raised by wolves, you might not expect them to have perfect table manners, but we should expect all our MPs to say without qualification, biting people to death is wrong. And if you're in doubt, as someone with scars, don't say no one's ever tried to bite my leg off. So it's just a point of view if they bite you. We should expect all our MPs to be whipped, to stand up and not make excuses for homophobia. Philip Lee, I know you're married. I hope you're both very happy. Was it a long engagement? We wrecked our last general election campaign because we compromised, one person compromised on homophobia. Listen, all our MPs, if you don't want to wreck the next one, it's not just about the policy. To put it in language at least 2 of our MPs will need to understand. You may try to get into Parliament with good policies, but without faith, you are nothing.
Thank you, Alex. Would Barbara Gibson from Welwyn Hatfield please stand by? I now call to speak in favour of the motion Hawker Groon from Twickenham and Richmond.
Good afternoon, conference, and thank you, Duncan. It is quite extraordinary, the point we find ourselves at. Here we are, the year 2019 in the United Kingdom, and we're having to debate whether 2 people that love each other should be allowed to get married. For me, being married to the person I love most in this world is one of the things that makes my life complete. My wife, Caroline, she is here. She sits in the audience up there. I could not picture a life where I would not be allowed to hold her hand in marriage. And as a white, heterosexual male standing here in front of you today, I cannot think of the last time that I was not allowed to do something because simply of who I am. But here we are. The year 2019, the country, the United Kingdom, and thousands of our fellow citizens are still being discriminated against. They are being locked out from the rights, the comforts, and the safeguards that many of us enjoy and cherish in marriage. And this is personal to me. Both of my brothers-in-law are gay. My two dearest friends in this world, John and John, the first same-sex couple to get married in a church in England after 30 years of having been deprived this right. The people that are dearest to me, I cannot stand the thought that they might find themselves deprived of the right to marry the person that they love, as thousands of our fellow citizens in Northern Ireland still do. And it makes my blood boil. It makes my blood boil that at a time when LGBTQ+ rights and people all over the world, from Trump's America to the Sultan of Brunei, are under attack, that we are allowing this grotesque violation of human rights to happen in our own backyard. It makes my blood boil that our government is not just tolerating this by their passive stance, they are actively fostering these ideologies of hate and bigotry, which should long have been confined to the books of history. This topic is a personal one for me, but it should be personal to any of us who value our human rights. Human rights are a matter of principle, not of geography. Conference, it is time to end this appalling treatment of our fellow citizens, here in Northern Ireland, in our country, in Europe, and anywhere in the world. Do the right thing, back this motion, end the injustice, because discrimination against any one of us is a discrimination against us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Hawker. Would Christine Jardine MP please stand by? I now call to speak in favour of the motion Dr. Barbara Gibson from Welwyn Hatfield, one of our new MEPs for the Eastern region.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Conference. Among our Lib Dem delegation of 16 members of the European Parliament, I serve as spokesperson on LGBTQ+ issues and participate in a key intergroup on LGBT+ rights. This motion is a prime example of why the UK needs to remain in the EU, to influence and lead change, not only in the UK, but in Europe and beyond. As far-right groups gain foothold in many countries, hard-won existing LGBTQ+ rights are at risk. There are still many EU countries whose constitutions prohibit same-sex marriage, impose restrictions to adoptions, and otherwise discriminate. Brexit and its implications for EU citizens living in the UK could result in splitting up families and eroding existing rights. Currently in the EU, 14 member states allow same-sex marriage. Most of the remaining member states recognize unions similar to marriage or some form of contract or registrations, but many still exclude access to joint adoption and in vitro fertilization. 6 countries, Bulgaria, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia, offer no legal recognition for same-sex relationships. Recognizing that legislation alone is not enough to protect against discrimination, the European Union has adopted a series of strategies setting out an active measures to combat discrimination and funding projects to stamp out homophobic and transphobic violence both inside the EU and around the world. I'll close by saying it's no coincidence that the groups on the far right who are pro-Brexit and anti-immigration are also often spouting anti-LGBT+ messages and fueling hate and violence. They're using issues like Brexit and immigration policy as a front for their fear, hate, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, and racism. Every win, however small, fuels their hate, gives them license to be nastier. We've seen this since the referendum and the rise in hate crimes. Theresa May repeatedly said, Brexit means Brexit. What we've seen is that for many of these movements, Brexit means hate. We cannot let them win. This is a fight for our culture, our British values of openness, tolerance, and fairness. Support this motion and the fight to stop Brexit, and let's take back our country from the extremists and ensure equal rights for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Would Lynn Featherstone please stand by? I now call Christine Jardine, MP for Edinburgh West and the party's spokesperson on equalities, to speak in favour of the motion.
Afternoon, conference. I've not actually got up here today to make a speech. I've got up here today to make your promise, not just as one of your MPs and your equality spokesperson, a member of the party, but as someone who believes in liberalism. And it's about that word up there that says equal. I'd like to remind you of a quote from Emma Lazarus that said, as long as one of us is not free, none of us is free. Well, that applies to equality as well. As long as there is one person in this room, in this country, who does not feel that they have equality with every single other person in this country, none of us has equality or has the right to claim that there is equality in this country. A few years ago, at a hustings in Aberdeen, I was asked about equal marriage. And I said that I only have one child, but if I had two children, I would want them both, if one was straight and one was gay, to have the same right to marry and to love the person that they chose and who chose them. That they should have the same protection under law and the same rights under law. I feel that more now standing here today than I did even then, because I realize that we do not have equality in this country of any sort, as long as there is one person in Northern Ireland who cannot make the commitment that they choose to make. As long as there is one person in this country who has to get permission from anyone, whether it's their spouse or not, to be the person that they are. And that brings me to the promise. As long as I am a member of this party, and that will be for a very long time, like Charles Kennedy, I'll be carried out of this world with my membership card in my pocket. I will fight to ensure that we have that equality, that no one feels that they cannot be who they want to be, and that every single person can stand up here in this platform and say that they have equality, not just in marriage, but in life. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Conference, we're now moving to the summation. None of the three amendments have been opposed, so we're not taking summating speakers from them. So after the next speaker, we'll be moving to the votes on the amendments and the motion. So I now call to summate on behalf of the motion, Baroness Lynn Featherstone. Lynn was, of course, the architect of the same-sex marriage legislation in the coalition.
So conference, just before I start, I want to shout out to Sarah, to Zoe, and to Jenny. We love you, and we want you back, and a way must be found. So, this has been an excellent debate, a debate to make liberal hearts sing, but I would expect nothing less from this party, the Liberal Democrat Party, with a lifelong, eternal commitment to equal rights and human rights. This is our home territory. And I wrote a book about how I made same-sex marriage happen during the coalition. It's called Equal Ever After. It might be on sale downstairs, I don't know. But if you don't write your own history as a Liberal Democrat, then David Cameron will try and steal it. And I wanted to get the truth out there Because, as many of you may observe, David Cameron says the thing he is most proud of is equal marriage, and his book is coming out, isn't it? So I'm very, very interested to see what he says. But he always forgets an inconvenient truth. It wasn't him, it was me. And I'm short on time. Is that okay? He certainly supported it, and it is very handy to have the Prime Minister on your side, but over half of his MPs voted against it. Now, the book is dedicated to the LGBT community, to all those who suffered the pain, the insult and injury of inequality, to all those who battled prejudice, discrimination, hatred and violence, and to all the brave heroes of the same-sex marriage journey on which I had the opportunity to go the final mile. I stood, and we all stand, on the shoulders of giants. And it happened because we are Liberal Democrats and because we were in government. And to us, equal rights means just that. Equal rights, not similar, not a bit like, but identical rights. Equal civil partnerships were a great step forward, but they weren't marriage, and they weren't equal, and it didn't feel equal. So in 2010, I find myself Home Office Minister, Equalities Minister, who knew? Michael Heseltine, amazingly, his advice to me as a newbie minister was to choose something and focus on it relentlessly. It wasn't in the coalition agreement, wasn't in the manifesto, but nevertheless, that didn't bother me. I focused on it, and the rest is history. And despite fierce opposition from many quarters, we can all get married now. I would if someone would ask me. But, all right, whoever it was, whatever your gender, yes. But we didn't manage everything. In order to get that primary equality, big step change through of equal marriage, lots of things got left on the wayside, and today is about that wayside. Unfinished business, the humanist weddings, the equal pensions, the straight civil partnerships are happening, but Northern Ireland, how dreadful is that? Of course we must step in and deliver equality in Northern Ireland, and for a government that is so keen on the will of the people, they're not so keen on the will of the Northern Ireland people. Anyway, we had, as I said, a fantastic debate. I am bound to forget. Is that the orange light already? I can't see the lights. Where are they?
Yes,
oh,
it is. Sorry.
Oh, my God. Helen Belcher and Joanna, very moving. You made us understand the spousal veto. Julian Huppert, as ever, pointed out how cruel and unfair it is. Toby Kane on humanist weddings. Adrian Chet, Danny Wilkinson, the milestones of our lives, and so on and so forth. Tim Pickstone, you can't choose. I mean, religion. Why should you be forced to choose between religion and your sexuality? I would call out to all the churches and the mosques and the synagogues to look at that one. And really, I just want to finish, because red light's on, conference when I was at the Home Office, Stephen Fry came to see me, and we were talking about equal marriage. And I said to him, the state's job is to facilitate the sort of marriage people want, not dictate which is right, marriage or civil partnerships. And he later tweeted that day, those people at the Home Office are really rather reasonable. Vote for the motion, support the amendments. Thank you, conference.
Thank you, Len. Thank you very much, Lynn. I gave Lynn a few extra seconds because of the unexpected proposal of marriage in the debate. We're now moving to the vote. We have a series of 4 votes. There are 3 amendments, and then we'll vote on the main motion as amended. So get your voting cards ready, and when you vote, hold them up with the word voting towards me. We're going to vote on Amendment 1, first of all. You'll see the text in Conference Daily. Could I see all those in favour of Amendment 1? Thank you very much. Could I see all those against Amendment 1? I'm not sure I can see anyone, so that is very clearly carried. Now we'll move on to Amendment 2. Can I see all those in favour of Amendment 2? Thank you. Can I now see all those against Amendment 2? Again, I'm not sure I can see. There is 1 or 2, but that is very clearly carried. Thank you, Conference. Now we'll move on to the vote on Amendment 3. Can I see all those in favour of Amendment 3? Thank you. And all those against Amendment 3? Amendment 3 is overwhelmingly carried. So we now vote on the main motion as amended by all the 3 amendments. Can I see all those in favour of the motion? Thank you very much. And can I see all those against? Again, that is overwhelmingly carried. Thank you very much, Conference. Conference, remember to vote in the emergency motions ballot. You've got about 5 minutes. Thank you to my aides, Sally Burnell and Liz Lynn, and have a good lunchtime.